During my 73rd birthday dinner at my daughter's penthouse, I started feeling dizzy, so I went to the kitchen to get some water. What I saw there made me fake a heart attack. They thought I was dying. The room did not gasp in horror. It exhaled in relief. I saw the smile flicker on my son-in-law's face before my eyes rolled back. He thought he had won. He thought the old man was finally checking out, leaving the fortune behind. But what Brad did not know was that I was not having a heart attack. I was executing a tactical retreat because 10 minutes earlier, I had seen something in their kitchen that turned my blood to ice. My name is Reginald King, and this is the story of how I had to die to save my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. The humiliation began the moment my tires touched the pavement of the Sterling Tower. I pulled my 1998 Lincoln Town Car up to the glass entrance. It is a good car, solid steel, American made. It runs quiet, and it has carried me safely since the day my wife Betty passed away. But to the valet standing under the gold awning, it looked like a piece of junk. He stepped in front of my bumper with his hand raised, not offering a ticket but issuing a stop order. I rolled down the window. The young man looked at my gray beard, my Sunday suit that was perhaps 20 years out of style, and he sneered. "Delivery entrance is around the back, old man," he said, waving me away like I was a stray dog. "This is a private resident." I did not raise my voice. I did not tell him that I could buy this building, evict every tenant, and turn it into a parking lot for my fleet of trucks before lunch. I learned a long time ago that true power does not need to shout. I simply turned off the engine. "I am here to see Brad Sterling and Keisha King," I said calmly. "I am her father." The valet laughed. He actually laughed. He looked at his earpiece and muttered something about a vagrant blocking the driveway. That was when the glass doors slid open and he stepped out. Brad Sterling, my son-in-law. He looked like a shark in a $3,000 Italian suit. His teeth were too white. His tan was too orange. He walked with the arrogance of a man who has never had to work a day of manual labor in his life. He saw me, and he saw the valet trying to shoo me away. A decent man would have stepped in. A decent man would have apologized. Brad just grinned. "It is all right," he told the valet, his voice loud enough for the people in the lobby to hear. "My father-in-law enjoys playing the pauper. It is his little hobby." He leaned into my window. The smell of expensive cologne was suffocating. "Reggie, you know better than to park this heap here," Brad whispered, the smile never leaving his face. "You are embarrassing, Keisha. Take it around to the freight elevator. The service staff will let you up." The freight elevator. He wanted me to ride up with the catering carts and the garbage. I looked him in the eye. His eyes were blue and empty, like a swimming pool with no water. "Happy birthday to me," I muttered. I drove around the back. I parked next to a dumpster. I rode up 40 floors in a steel box that smelled of bleach and old vegetable. When the doors opened, I stepped into the kitchen, not the foyer. Cooks were shouting orders. Waiters were balancing trays of champagne. I had to weave through them just to get to the living room. The penthouse was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Modern art that looked like spilled paint on the wall. White leather furniture that looked like it would stain if you even thought about sitting on it. There were about 50 people there. Men in suits discussing mergers. Women in cocktail dresses discussing their plastic surgery. I stood at the edge of the room holding my old fedora hat in my hand. I felt small. I felt invisible. And that is exactly how they wanted me to feel. I scanned the room for Keisha, my little girl. I remembered her running around our backyard in Queens with dirt on her knees. I remembered paying for her private schools, her violin lessons, her Ivy League tuition. I saw her across the room. She was wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my car. She was laughing at something a tall man with silver hair was saying. She looked up and saw me. The laughter died instantly. She said something to the man, touched his arm, and walked toward me. She did not run. She did not smile. She walked with a quick, nervous pace, checking to see if anyone important was watching. "Daddy," she said, kissing the air next to my cheek. "You made it." She smelled like champagne and anxiety. "Happy birthday," she added, but her eyes were darting around the room. "Listen, Brad is really stressed tonight. These are very important investors. We need everything to be perfect." I looked at her. I looked for the daughter who used to sit on my lap and read business contracts with me, asking what the big words meant. She was gone. "I will try not to break anything I said." She forced a laugh. "Oh, Daddy, stop it. Come on, let me show you to your seat." She led me past the long mahogany dining table. It was set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. There were place cards with calligraphy names. I saw the names of bankers, hedge fund managers, politicians. I expected her to pull out a chair for me. She walked past the table. She walked past the kitchen island where the casual guests were mingling. She led me to a small round folding table set up in the corner near the hallway to the bathroom. There were two other people sitting there. One was the nanny for my granddaughter Maya. The other was a private security guard who was on his break. "Here you go," Keisha said, patting my shoulder. "It is quieter here. You will be more comfortable. You know how your hearing gets when there is too much noise." My hearing was perfect. My hearing was sharp enough to hear the engine trouble in a diesel truck from 3 blocks away. That is how I built listening. I sat down. The chair wobbled. "Enjoy the food, Daddy," she said. "I have to go host. We will talk later." She walked away before I could say a word. word. I sat there, a 73-year-old man, a father, a widower, staring at the back of the daughter I had adored. The nanny looked at me with pity. She pushed a basket of bread rolls toward me. "Eat, Mr. King," she whispered. "The crab cakes are gone. They did not save any for this table." I took a roll. It was cold. I watched the party from my exile in the corner. I saw Brad holding court in the center of the room. He was telling stories, waving his hand. People were laughing. He looked like a king, but I knew the truth. I knew what the financial papers whispered. Brad Sterling was a fraud, a man who moved money from one pocket to another and called it profit, a Ponzi schemer in a designer suit. He caught my eye across the room. He raised his glass in a mock toast, then turned his back. He was signaling to everyone that I did not matter, that I was just baggage. 10 minutes later, Keisha came back. She did not bring cake. She did not bring a gift. She brought a glass of whiskey and a look of desperation that she tried to hide behind a smile. "Daddy," she said, pulling a chair from the wall and sitting close to me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We need to talk about trust. The King family trust. The legal fortress I had built 30 years ago to protect my asset, to protect my family from themselves." "What about it?" I asked, sipping the whiskey. "It was cheap. Brad kept the good stuff for his friend. Brad and I, we have this incredible opportunity," she said, her words coming out fast. "A charity initiative, building schools and developing nations. It is beautiful, Daddy. Mom would have loved it." "Do not bring your mother into this," I said sharply. Keisha flinched. "Right, sorry. But listen, to get the matching grants, we need to show liquid capital. We need you to unlock the principal amount in the trust, just for a few days, just to show the bank. Unlock the principal." That meant giving them access to the core million, the money that was never supposed to be touched until I was dead, and even then only under strict conditions. "You want me to sign over control?" I asked. "Just temporarily," she pleaded. She grabbed my hand. Her palm was sweating. "Daddy, please. It is for a good cause. It is for our legacy." I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eye. It was not fear of missing a charity opportunity. It was the fear of a woman who was drowning. Brad was in trouble, deep trouble, and he was using her to get to my life raft. I leaned back in the creaky folding chair. I played the part they expected. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I let my hand tremble as I set the glass down. "I do not know pumpkin," I said, making my voice sound thin and confused. "I forget where I put the papers. My memory, it is not what it used to be. The doctors say I get confused. It was a lie. My doctors said I had the constitution of a bull, but I needed to see how far she would go." "That is okay, Daddy," she said, eager now. "Brad has the papers. He has everything ready. You just need to sign. We can do it tonight, after the cake. It will be your birthday present to us, to the world, to the world." She wanted me to sign away my life's work as a birthday present. I felt a wave of dizziness. This time it was not an act. My blood pressure was rising. The anger was boiling in my veins, hot and thick. "I needed air. I needed water. I need a moment, Keisha," I said. "I need some water." "I will get a waiter," she said. "No," I said, standing up. My knees popped. "I will get it. I need to stretch my leg." I walked away from her. I walked away from the noise, the fake laughter, the clinking of glasses. I pushed through the swing door into the kitchen. It was chaotic, hot, and loud. But there was a smaller prep kitchen in the back, a butler's pantry where they staged the drinks. It was empty. I went to the sink and poured a glass of tap water. I drank it in one gulp. I leaned against the counter, trying to slow my heart rate. I closed my eyes, thinking of Betty, thinking of how she would have handled this. She would have taken a belt to both of them. Then I heard voices. They were coming from the other side of the pantry shelving unit. It was a blind spot. "It is tonight or never, Keisha." It was Brad. His voice was not charming anymore. It was a growl. "But he is my father, Brad. He is confused. He does not understand what he is signing." That was Keisha. She sounded like she was crying. "He does not need to understand," Brad hissed. "Listen to me. The Russians are not going to wait another week. If we do not have that money in the account by Monday morning, I am dead. Do you understand? And if I go down, you go down. The penthouse, the cars, the status, it all goes. You will be back in Queens waiting for a bus. Is that what you want?" "No," Keisha whimpered. "Then get him to sign. And if he hesitates, if he plays that senile card," there was a silence, the sound of glass clinking. "What is that?" Keisha asked. Her voice trembled. "Insurance," Brad said. "Just in case the old mule is stubborn. Evans gave it to me. It mimics a cardiac event. 2 minutes after he drinks it, his heart stops. By the time the paramedics get here, he is gone. Natural cause. An old man with a bad ticker. Brad, no, we cannot kill him." "We are not killing him," Brad said, his voice dropping to a chilling calm. "We are accelerating his retirement. He is worth more dead than alive right now, Keisha. The life insurance policy plus the trust. It solves everything." I stood frozen in the pantry. My hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. They were not just trying to steal from me. They were planning to murder me. Tonight, in this house. I heard footsteps. They were coming toward the pantry. I had seconds to think. I could confront them. I was strong, but Brad was younger and he was desperate. If I confronted him now, he might just use a knife. He might overpower me. And Keisha, my God, Keisha was too weak to stop him. I could run, but the elevator code required a key card. I was trapped on the 40th floor. I looked at the glass of water in my hand. I looked at the door leading back to the party. Brad walked into the pantry. He was holding a bottle of champagne and a small vial of blue liquid. He saw me. He froze. "Reggie," he said. His eyes went wide. Then they narrowed. "How long have you been standing there?" I did not answer. I looked at the vial in his hand. He knew that I knew. He took a step toward me. He reached into his jacket pocket. I did not know if he had a gun, but I knew I could not let him corner me in this small room. I had to change the battlefield. I had to create a situation where he could not touch me without witnesses. I dropped the glass of water. It shattered on the tile floor. I let out a groan, a loud guttural sound that echoed into the main kitchen. I grabbed my left arm. I clenched my chest, and I let my legs give out. I fell to the floor, knocking over a stack of silver trays. The crash was thunderous. "Reggie," Brad said, confused. "Help!" I gasped, forcing the air out of my lung. My heart. The door to the main kitchen swung open. 3 waiters ran in. Keisha ran in behind them. "Dad," she screamed. Brad stood over me. He still had the vial in his hand. He shoved it into his pocket. He looked down at me, and for a second he was calculating. If I died right now, natural causes, he was safe. He didn't even have to use the poison. "Call 911, a waiter shouted. "No," Brad barked. I know CPR. Give him space." He knelt beside me. He leaned close. His hands were on my chest, but he wasn't checking my pulse. He was pressing down hard, too hard. He was trying to hurt me. "Die, you old bastard," he whispered so low only I could hear. "Just let go." I stared up at him. I let my eyes roll back. I let my body go limp. I played dead, but inside, the soldier in me was wide awake. I was not checking out. I was preparing for war. The dizziness hit me first, a wave of vertigo that tilted the room on its axis. It was not a performance, not yet. It was the blood pressure of a 73-year-old man who had just realized his daughter was trying to swindle him out of his life's work. The noise of the party, the clinking crystal, the high-pitched laughter of people who had never worked a day in their lives, it all became a roar in my ear. I needed silence. I needed air. I needed to get away from Keisha before I said something that would reveal my hand too early. I excused myself, my hand gripping the back of a velvet chair for support. Keisha did not even notice. She was too busy signaling a waiter for more hors d'oeuvres. I walked toward the swinging doors of the kitchen, my legs heavy, my heart thumping a slow, angry rhythm against my rib. The main kitchen was a war zone of caterers, steam, and shouting, but I knew the layout of this penthouse better than Brad did. I had reviewed the blueprints when they bought it, checking for structural integrity because that is what I do. I knew there was a butler's pantry just off the main service area, a narrow strip of marble and mahogany where they staged the drinks. It was quiet there, darker. I slipped inside and leaned against the cold granite counter. I poured a glass of tap water, my hands shaking with a rage I had not felt since the days I had to fight for contracts on the docks of Baltimore. I drank the water, trying to cool the fire in my chest. I closed my eyes, summoning the image of Betty, my wife, my rock. She would have known what to do. She would have marched out there and pulled Keisha by her ear, but Betty was gone and I was alone in a nest of vipers. Then the voices drifted through the service hat. They were hushed, urgent, slicing through the hum of the refrigerator. "You are being dramatic, Keisha. Lower your voice." It was Brad. The charm was gone from his tone. He sounded like a cornered animal. Dramatic Keisha's voice was trembling, thick with tears. "You are talking about poisoning my father, Brad. This is not just a signature anymore. This is crazy." I froze. I set the glass down on a napkin so it wouldn't make a sound. I moved closer to the gap in the shelving unit, peering through the bottles of expensive vodka and gin. They were standing by the wine fridge. Brad had his back to me, but I could see Keisha's face. She looked pale, her makeup smudged. She looked like a child who had broken a vase, not a woman conspiring to commit a felony. "We are not poisoning him," Brad hissed, grabbing her upper arm. His fingers dug into her flesh. "Listen to me." Evans explained it perfectly. "It is a metabolic inhibitor. It just slows the heart rate down, way down. It mimics a cardiac arrest." And then what Keisha pulled away, hugging herself. Then he collapses. We call 911. By the time they get here, his heart has stopped for maybe 2-3 minutes. Evans is the on-call physician at St. Jude's tonight. He receives the ambulance. He resuscitates him. He resuscitates him, Keisha repeated, her voice hollow. "Yes, but the oxygen deprivation, it does the heavy lifting for us." Brad's voice turned smooth, manipulative. "He will be alive, baby. He will still be your dad, but he will be diminished. Cognitive impairment, memory loss. He won't be able to manage his affairs. The court will have no choice but to grant us emergency guardianship. We get control of the trust, we pay off the Russian, and we put him in the best facility money can buy. He lives out his days in luxury, and we survive. Everyone wins. The Russian." I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I knew Brad was a gambler and a fraud, but I did not know he had entangled himself with organized crime. $10 million. That was the number I had heard whispered in the industry. He was in deep, and he was using my brain cells as his currency to buy his way out. "But what if he doesn't wake up?" Keisha asked. "What if the dose is too strong?" "He is 73. Brad. Then he dies," Brad said flatly. I saw Keisha flinch, but she did not scream. She did not slap him. She just stood there paralyzed by her own weakness. "If he dies, we inherit inherit. Brad continued pouring a clear blue liquid from a small medical vial into a glass of champagne. The bubbles fizzed up, masking the color as it diluted. Either way, the problem is solved tonight. The deadline is midnight, Keisha. If I don't have access to that capital by tomorrow morning, they are coming for me, and they are coming for you. Do you want to be a widow? Do you want to be homeless? He held the glass up to the light. It looked innocent. It looked like a celebration. Go get him, Brad ordered. Bring him here. Tell him we are toasting to the charity. I stepped back from the shelf. My mind was racing, calculating variables like a computer. I could burst out now. I could smash that glass against the wall. But then what Brad was 45, desperate and physically stronger. If I confronted him in this secluded pantry, he wouldn't need the poison. He could shove me. He could hit me. A fall at my age, a blow to the head. He could claim I slipped. He could claim I attacked him in a dementia-fueled rage. It would be my word against theirs, and I would be the dead man on the floor. And even if I escaped, even if I made it to the elevator, they would block me. They would say I was having an episode. They have the security guards on their payroll. They have the narrative. I looked at the door leading back to the party. I looked at the knife block on the counter. No, violence was a young man's game. I needed to outsmart them. I needed to disrupt the timeline. Brad wanted a controlled medical event. He wanted me to drink, wait 2 minutes, and collapse in the living room surrounded by witnesses who would testify that I simply fainted. He needed Dr. Evans to control the narrative at the hospital. I had to take away his control. I had to make the medical event happen now before the poison entered my system. I had to force their hand. I took a deep breath. I thought about the empire I had built. I thought about the trucks rolling down the highway with my name on the side. I thought about the disrespect, the valet, the folding table, the betrayal of the daughter I had loved more than life itself. Reggie King does not go out like this, I whispered to myself. I saw Brad turning toward the pantry entrance, the glass in his hand. It was time. I let out a sound, a guttural groan that started low in my throat and erupted into a cry of pain. I dropped the glass of water I was holding. It shattered on the tile floor with a violence that sounded like a gunshot. I grabbed my left arm, digging my fingers into the bicep. I clenched my other hand over my chest, bunching the fabric of my cheap suit. I squeezed my eyes shut and let my knees buckle. Gravity took over. I did not fall gently. I threw myself down. My shoulder hit the cabinet. My hips slammed into the floor. I knocked over a stack of silver serving trays on my way down, creating a cacophony of metal on stone that would have woken the dead. I landed hard on my back, sprawling out, gasping for air, making my breathing ragged and wet. Brad froze in the doorway. He was holding the poisoned champagne. He looked at me, then at the glass, then back at me. Confusion washed over his face. This was not the script. I had not drunk the poison yet. "Reggie," he stammered. "Help!" I wheezed, projecting my voice toward the main kitchen. My heart, I can't breathe. The door swung open. Keisha ran in, followed by 2 waiters. She saw me on the floor, writhing, clutching my chest. "Dad," she screamed. She fell to her knees beside me. Her hands hovered over me, terrified to touch. "What happened?" she yelled at Brad. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Brad shouted back, panic rising in his voice. "He hasn't even touched the drink." "Call 911, a waiter shouted, reaching for his phone. I watched Brad through slit eyes. I saw the gears turning in his head. He was holding the evidence of a murder attempt in his right hand. If the paramedics came and found me having a natural heart attack, he didn't need the poison. In fact, the poison was a liability now. He quickly turned to the sink and poured the champagne down the drain, running the tap for a second. He shoved the empty vial into his jacket pocket. "Don't call 911 yet," Brad barked at the waiter, trying to take command. "Give him air. I know CPR. Everyone back up." He knelt beside me on the other side. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the sweat breaking out on his skin. He placed his hands on my chest. "Dad, can you hear me?" Keisha was sobbing. I let my head loll to the side. I let my jaw go slack. I fluttered my eyelids and then let them roll back into my head. I held my breath. Brad pressed down on my sternum. He wasn't doing CPR. He was checking to see if I was faking, or perhaps he was hoping to finish what nature had seemingly started. He pressed hard, a painful, grinding pressure. "Die, you old bastard," he whispered so low that only I could hear, masked by Keisha's wailing. "Just let go. Save us the trouble." I lay there limp, enduring the pain. My heart was beating strong and steady against my ribs, a secret drum of war. They wanted a medical emergency. I would give them one, but I would not be going to St. Jude's, and I would certainly not be dying tonight. "The paramedics are on their way," the waiter announced from the doorway. "ETA 4 minutes. Brad looked up, his face a mask of false concern, but his eyes were calculating. He thought he had lucked out. He thought the universe had delivered my death as a birthday gift. I stayed still. I waited. I prepared for the ride of my life. The ride down in the freight elevator was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of industrial cleaner. I was strapped to a gurney, a plastic mask over my face, pumping oxygen I did not need, but I greedily accepted it because it hid my expression. Through the slats of my half-closed eyes, I saw Keisha weeping into a silk handkerchief, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. She looked genuinely terrified, which was the only thing that kept my heart from breaking completely. She was weak, she was greedy, but she was not a cold-blooded killer like her husband. Not yet. Brad did not come down with us. He stayed behind to manage the guests, he said, to handle the crisis. I knew what that meant. He was upstairs pouring himself a scotch, ensuring the poison was gone, and rehearsing his eulogy. When the elevator doors opened at the loading dock, the cool night air hit my face. The flashing red lights of the ambulance bounced off the concrete walls, but the paramedics who had loaded me up were pushed aside. A man in a white coat stepped forward, taking charge with an authority that made the EMTs hesitate. "I will take it from here," the man said. "I am the family physician. I have been treating Mr. King for years." I knew that voice. It was smooth, cultured, and devoid of any real warmth. It was Dr. Julian Evans. My blood ran cold. Evans was not just any doctor. He was the chief of medicine at St. Jude's, the hospital where my wife Betty had spent her final days. He was a man who drove a Porsche and played golf with Brad every Sunday. He was on the payroll. The EMTs looked at each other, but a chief of medicine outranks a paramedic every day of the week. They stepped back. Evans climbed into the back of the ambulance with me. He slammed the doors shut, sealing us in a box of steel and medical equipment. "Drive," he ordered the driver through the partition. No siren. "We do not want to stress the patient." The engine roared to life and we began to move. I lay there, my body limp, my mind racing. I was alone with the man who had been sent to finish the job. Evans did not check my pulse. He did not listen to my chest. He looked at the cardiac monitor, which was beeping a steady rhythmic cadence. Beep, beep, beep. A strong, healthy 73-year-old heart. He frowned. He looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and clinical curiosity. "You are a stubborn old ox, aren't you, Reggie?" he muttered to himself. "Brad said you collapsed. He said you were gone." He reached into his medical bag. It was not the standard issue kit. It was a leather satchel. He pulled out a syringe and a small vial of clear liquid. It was not the blue poison from the pantry. This was something else. Something pharmaceutical. He tapped the vial. He drew the liquid into the syringe. He flicked the needle to clear the air bubbles. The monitor beeped steadily. He looked at it again. "We need to get that heart rate down," he whispered. "We need to make the narrative fit the diagnosis. Just a little sedative to help you sleep, Reggie. A nice long sleep. To prevent brain damage, of course." He was going to sedate me into a coma. He was going to slow my heart until it barely fluttered, then claim I had suffered hypoxic brain injury during the collapse. He was going to turn me into a vegetable so Brad could sign the power of attorney papers on my behalf. I watched him through the slit of my eyelid. He moved closer. He swabbed the IV port on my arm with an alcohol wipe. The smell was sharp and stinging. I could not let that needle touch me. If that drug entered my veins, the war was over. I would wake up drooling in a nursing home, or I would not wake up at all. But I could not just sit up and punch him. We were in a moving vehicle. If I fought him, he would claim I was having a psychotic break caused by the stroke. He would call for restraints. He would have the driver pull over and help him hold me down. I had to be smarter. I had to use my body as a weapon in a way that looked involuntary. The needle hovered inches from my arm. Now, I unleashed every ounce of energy I had been holding back. I did not strike him. I convulsed. I arched my back violently, slamming my head back against the pillow. I threw my arms out in a wild, spasmodic jerk, mimicking a grand mal seizure. My right arm, heavy and flailing, smashed into Evans's hand. The impact was perfect. The syringe went flying. It hit the metal wall of the ambulance and shattered, spraying the clear liquid all over the floor. Evans cursed, falling back against the cabinet. "My God," he shouted. I kept thrashing. I let my legs kick against the gurney rails. I made guttural choking sounds, letting foam gather at the corners of my mouth. I rolled my eyes back until only the whites were showing. "Stop it!" Evans yelled, scrambling on the floor, trying to avoid the broken glass. He grabbed my shoulders, trying to pin me down. His face was inches from mine, and in that moment, staring into his panicked, shark-like eyes, a memory hit me with the force of a freight train. It was 3 years ago. I was standing in a hospital room much like this one. Betty was in the bed. She had gone in for a routine procedure, a hip replacement. She was healthy. She was strong. But 2 days after the surgery, she had started to decline. She became confused. She stopped recognizing me. I remembered Evans standing over her, holding a syringe, just like the one he had held moments ago. "It is just a sedative, Reggie," he had told me then, his voice dripping false sympathy. "To help her rest. Her heart is working too hard." Betty had looked at me one last time before he injected her. Her eyes were clear for a second. She looked scared. She tried to say something, and then she went to sleep. She never woke up. Evans listed the cause of death as a pulmonary embolism. Sudden, unavoidable. Brad had handled the funeral arrangements. Brad had handled the insurance paperwork. Brad had been the one to recommend Evans for the surgery. The realization made me stop thrashing for a split second. They killed her. They didn't just want my money now. They had practiced on my wife. They had murdered the only woman I ever loved because her life insurance policy was the seed money for Brad's hedge fund. The rage that filled me was not hot. It was absolute zero. It was the cold, hard vacuum of space. I resumed my convulsions, channeling that fury into my limb. I kicked the medical tray, sending instruments clattering to the floor. I grabbed Evans's lapel with a grip that could crush stone and pulled him down, slamming his chest against the rail of the gurney. He gasped, the wind knocked out of him. "Driver," he screamed. "Pull over. He is seizing." No, I thought. We are not pulling over. I let out a long, ragged exhale and went limp again. I stopped moving completely. I held my breath. The monitor was going haywire because of my movement. The leads had come. The alarm was blaring. Evans scrambled up his hair, disheveled, his glass askew. He looked at the shattered syringe on the floor. He looked at me. He didn't have another dose prepared. He checked his watch. We were 2 minutes from the hospital. He made a decision. He grabbed the oxygen mask and shoved it back onto my face, pressing it down hard enough to breathe. "Fine," he hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We will do it the hard way." He banged on the partition. "Step on it. Get us to the bay, code blue." He was calling a code blue. He was going to rush me straight into the trauma room, bypassing the triage. He wanted chaos. He wanted to get me behind closed doors where he could control the instrument. The ambulance lurched as the driver hit the accelerator. Sirens wailed now, a mournful song in the night. I lay still, my mind sharpening into a blade. I knew who my enemies were now. It wasn't just a greedy son-in-law and a weak daughter. It was a cabal, a network, and Dr. Julian Evans had just moved to the top of my list. We screeched to a halt at the emergency bay. The doors flew open. The cool night air rushed in again, mixed with the smell of exhaust and anxiety. "Let's go, let's go," Evans was shouting, jumping out. He looked flushed, frantic. He was playing the part of the heroic doctor saving a life, but I saw his hands shaking. A team of nurses and residents swarmed the gurney. They pulled me out. I was moving fast now, the ceiling lights flashing overhead like strobe lights. "What do we have?" a resident asked, running alongside. 73-year-old male witnessed collapse. "Possible myocardial infarction, seizure activity and transport," Evans barked. "I am taking lead. Get him to Trauma 1. Clear the room. No students." Trauma 1, the isolation room. The room where people went to die. As they wheeled me through the sliding glass doors of the ER, I saw him. Brad. He was already there. He must have taken the helicopter or driven like a maniac. He was standing at the nurse's station, still wearing his tuxedo, looking like a grieving statesman. He was talking to the head nurse, pointing at the doors. "That is my father-in-law," I heard him say, his voice commanding. "I want total privacy. No visitors. No one comes in or out without my permission. I have his medical proxy. He didn't have my proxy. My lawyer Marcus had my proxy." But in the chaos of an emergency room, a man in a tuxedo shouting orders looks like the authority. The nurse nodded, typing something into the computer. "Security post a guard at Trauma 1. The family requests lockdown." They were sealing me in. They rolled me into the trauma room. It was cold, stainless steel and bright lights. They transferred me from the ambulance gurney to the hospital bed. Evans was barking orders to the nurses. "Get an IV line established. I want 50 milligrams propofol ready. We need to intubate to protect the airway." Intubate. He wanted to shove a tube down my throat to stop me talking. He wanted to put me under so deep I would never surface. I had to act fast. I couldn't fight an entire trauma team. I had to use their own protocol against them. As the nurse reached for my arm to insert the IV, I let my eyes flutter. I focused on her. She was young, maybe 25. She looked kind. I grabbed her wrist. Not hard, but firm. She jumped. "He is awake," she shouted. "Dr. Evans, he is awake." Evans spun around. He looked like he had seen a goat. "Reggie," he said, moving in to block my view of the other. "Can you hear me? You are in the hospital. You had a seizure." I looked past him. I looked at the young nurse. "I needed a witness." "I need water," I rasped. My throat dry. "He is confused," Evans said quickly. "Do not give him anything by mouth. Proceed with the sedation. He is post-ictal. He is a danger to himself." "Wait," the resident said. "He is tracking." "Sir, can you tell me your name?" I looked at the resident. I summoned every ounce of dignity I had left. "Reginald King," I whispered. Chest pain. Gone. Just tired." The resident looked at the monitor. "Sinus rhythm. Normal. BP is 130/80. Dr. Evans, his vitals are stabilized. I do not think we need to intubate." Evans's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He was losing control of the room. He couldn't just knock me out now, not with 3 other witnesses seeing a conscious talking patient. "We need to be sure." Evans snapped. "He has a history of cerebrovascular issues. He needs an MRI immediately, and I want him in the ICU. Private room. Isolation protocols. He is highly susceptible to infection." He was pivoting. "If he couldn't kill me or coma me right here, he would bury me in the system. He would stick me in a room where no one could hear me scream, and then he would finish the job later." "Move him," Evans ordered. "Now." They began to wheel me out of the trauma room. As we passed through the hallway, I saw Brad again. He was on his phone pacing. He saw me moving. He saw my eyes open. For a second, our gazes locked. He didn't look relieved. He looked like a man calculating his next move. He tapped his phone, sending a message. I closed my eyes as they pushed me into the elevator. I was alive. I had survived the ambulance, but now I was going up to the VIP floor, the killing floor. I was a prisoner in my own hospital, surrounded by enemies, and the only person who knew the truth was a 19-year-old girl who was was probably being threatened by her father right now. I had to find a way out, and I had to do it before Dr. Evans came back with his special medicine. The ICU room was a tomb of glass and steel chilled to a temperature that felt designed to preserve meat rather than heal the living. They had placed me in a corner suite isolated from the nurses' station by thick curtains and a heavy sliding door. It was the VIP treatment, which in this hospital meant you died with better linens and fewer witnesses. I lay there motionless, my eyes taped shut by my own will. I had decided to become a stone. I had decided to become the vegetable they so desperately wanted me to be. It is not easy to play dead when your blood is boiling. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get up, to rip the IV out of my arm, to find a phone to call Marcus. But I knew the moment I showed a flicker of consciousness, Evans would push that plunger. He would fill my veins with enough sedative to turn my brain into mush, so I regulated my breathing. I matched the rhythm of the ventilator they had hooked me up to, letting the machine dictate the rise and fall of my chest. I focused on the beep of the monitor, counting the seconds, waiting for the vultures to land. I did not have to wait long. The door slid open with a hiss of pneumatic pressure. I heard the click of expensive heels on the linoleum and the heavy, agitated tread of Italian leather loafers. I smelled them before I heard them. The cloying scent of Keisha's perfume now mixed with the sharp tang of fierce sweat and the stale aroma of scotch and cigars that clung to Brad like a second skin. "He is out cold," Evans' voice said. He sounded bored. I gave him a cocktail that would drop a rhino. "He isn't hearing anything, and he certainly isn't remembering anything." "Good," Brad snarled. The sound of his voice made my muscles twitch, but I forced them to remain slack. "Because we have a massive problem, Julie. A massive $10 million problem." "Lower your voice," Keisha whispered. Her voice was trembling, thin and brittle like dried leaves. "Stop telling me what to do," Brad snapped. I heard the sound of him pacing, his footsteps sharp and angry. The plan was simple. A heart attack at home, a grieving daughter, a quick cremation. Now look at this mess. We have a police report from the ambulance. We have witnesses in the ER who heard him talking. We have a paper trail, Julian. "I can manage the paper trail," Evans said smoothly. "Medical records are digital. They can be edited. I have already flagged his file as sensitive. Only I have administrative access. As far as the system is concerned, Reginald King arrived here in a post-ictal state, confused, combative, and showing signs of advanced vascular dementia." "Dementia?" Keisha asked. "But he was lucid. He was talking about the trust. Confusion is a hallmark of the disease." Evans replied, his tone patronizing. "He has good days and bad days. Tonight was a catastrophic neurological event. The seizure he had in the ambulance, that was likely a series of mini-strokes. His brain is firing misfires. We can build a case that his competency has been degrading for months. I lay there listening to them rewrite my history. I built a logistics empire from a single delivery van. I memorized shipping routes across 3 continents. And now 3 feet away from me, a man I paid to keep my wife alive was diagnosing me with a disease I did not have to cover up his own incompetence." "That takes too long," Brad interrupted. "We don't have months to prove he is crazy. We don't even have weeks." He stopped pacing. He moved closer to the bed. I could feel his heat. He leaned over me. I felt his breath on my face. "We have 48 hours, he whispered. "Why?" Keisha asked. "Why the rush, Brad? You said the investors could wait." "There are no investors," Keisha Brad shouted, then immediately lowered his voice to a hiss. "It is not a hedge fund. It never was. I borrowed money, a lot of money, and I didn't borrow it from a bank." "From who?" Keisha's voice was barely audible. "From Volkov," Brad said. The name hit me like a physical blow. Dmitry Volkov, the Russian. I knew that name. Anyone who did business in the shipping yards of New Jersey in the 90s knew that name. Volkov didn't sue you when you didn't pay. He didn't send debt collectors. He sent men with plastic sheets and bone saws. "Oh my God," Keisha gasped. "You borrowed from the Russian mob. I needed the capital." Brad defended himself, sounding like a petulant child. "The market turned on me. I thought I could double it and pay them back before they noticed. But the timeline moved up. They called me tonight during the party. That is why I stepped out. They want the $10 million back plus interest by Monday morning, or they start taking pieces of me. And after they are done with me, they are coming for you, Keisha. And they are coming for Maya. Maya, my granddaughter. My innocent, brilliant Maya." The rage that surged through me was so powerful, the heart monitor actually skipped a beat. "What was that?" Evans asked sharply. He moved to the monitor. I forced myself to calm down. I thought of a calm blue ocean. I thought of a flat horizon. The beeping steadied. "Just a PVC," Evans muttered. "A premature ventricular contraction. His heart is under stress." "So is mine," Brad yelled. "Look, Julian, I don't care about his heart. I care about his signature. If he is a vegetable, he can't sign the release for the trust. And if he doesn't sign, I can't pay Volkov. And if I can't pay Volkov, we are all dead. We need Plan B." "What is Plan B?" Keisha asked. She sounded numb. "We need emergency guardianship," Brad said. "We need to go to a judge tomorrow morning and say that Reggie is incapacitated, that he is in a persistent vegetative state with no hope of recovery. We need to become his legal conservators immediately to pay for his medical care. And once we have control," Evans added, picking up the thread, "we liquidate the assets to cover the debts. We claim it is for experimental treatments, or to secure his estate. But the judge will send a court-appointed doctor to to check him, Keisha said. She wasn't arguing against the morality. She was arguing the logistics. That broke me. My daughter wasn't trying to save me. She was trying to save herself. That is why he cannot be just sleep, Evans said coldly. He has to be deteriorate. I felt Evans's hand on my wrist. He was checking my pulse again. He is on a ventilator now to assist his breathing, Evans explained. It is standard protocol for sedation, but tomorrow night the graveyard shift is light. I have a nurse on duty who owes me a favor. We can extubate him. Extubate him? Keisha asked. We take the tube out, Evans said. We wean him off the oxygen, but we keep the sedation high. Very high. His respiratory drive will be suppressed. He will struggle to breathe on his own. His oxygen levels will drop. Hypoxia will set in. And then Brad asked, and then he either passes away from respiratory failure, which is a very peaceful, natural way to go for a man his age, or he survives but with significant irreversible brain damage due to the lack of oxygen. Either way, he is gone. He is no longer Reginald King. He is a body that needs a guardian. And you, as his next of kin, get the gavel. I listened to them plan my murder. It was clinical. It was efficient. It was the kind of meeting I used to have about shipping schedules only. The cargo was my life. Tomorrow night, Brad said. That gives us Sunday to file the emergency motion. Monday morning, we transfer the fund. Volkov gets paid. We survive. But what if he wakes up before then? Keisha asked. What if the drugs wear off? They won't, Evans assured her. I have him on a drip. He is locked in. He can hear us right now for all I know, but he can't move a muscle. He is a passenger in his own body. Brad laughed. It was a short, barking sound. Can you hear us, Reggie? He taunted, leaning close to my ear again. Are you in there, old man? I hope you are. I hope you can hear every word, because I want you to know that I won. You treated me like a peasant for 20 years. You looked down on me. You thought you were better than me because you built something and I just gambled. Well, look who is holding the cards now. He patted my cheek. It was a light, insulting tap. Enjoy the nap, Reggie. It is going to be a long one. Let's go, Evans said. I need to update his chart. We need to make sure no other staff members come in here unless they are cleared by me. Keisha lingered for him. I felt her hand brush my arm. It was trembling. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered, but I can't let them hurt Maya. Then she pulled her hand away. The door slid open. The footsteps retreated. The door hissed shut. Silence returned to the room, heavy and suffocating. I opened my eyes. The ceiling tiles were white and patterned with tiny dots. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. I had to keep my mind sharp. So that was the timeline. Tomorrow night, 24 hours. If I stayed in this bed, Evans would pull the tube. He would suffocate me in my sleep, and I would wake up a vegetable, or I wouldn't wake up at all. If I tried to leave now, the alarms would sound. The security guard Brad posted outside would stop me. Evans would rush in with another syringe. I was trapped in a glass cage, paralyzed by chemistry and circumstance. But they had made a mistake. A fatal mistake. Brad had mentioned Maya. He had said Volkov would come for her. And Keisha had said she was doing this to protect her daughter. They thought Maya was a pawn. They thought she was just a child to be protected. But they didn't know Maya like I did. They didn't know that every Sunday while Brad was golfing and Keisha was at the spa, Maya came to my house in Queens. They didn't know I had taught her how to play chess. They didn't know I had taught her how to read a balance sheet. And they certainly didn't know that I had given her a key to my safe deposit box 3 months ago just in case. Maya was 19. She was smart. And she was the only person in this family who had a spine. I needed to get to her. Or I needed her to get to me. But I was tied to a bed pumped full of drugs that made my limbs feel like lead. I needed to move. I needed to fight the sedation. I focused on my right hand. I focused on my index finger. Move. I commanded it. Move. It twitched. It was a tiny movement, barely a tremor, but it was a start. I looked at the clock on the wall. 2:00 a.m. The hospital was quiet. The shift change was hours away. This was the witching hour. I had to get out of this bed. I had to get out of this room. And I had to do it before Evans came back to finish the job. I closed my eyes again, gathering my strength. I thought of the Russians. I thought of Brad's smug face. I thought of Keisha's betrayal. Fuel. It was all fuel. Reggie King was not checking out. He was just getting started. I started to wiggle my toes. I started to flex my calves. I began the slow, painful process of waking up a body that was supposed to be dead. I had work to do. 2 in the morning is the hour of the wolf. It is the time when the spirit is weakest, when the body wants to surrender, and when the hospital staff is most likely to make a mistake. I lay in the dark, my eyes slitted open just a fraction, watching the nurse stationed at the desk outside my glass wall. She was not the one Evans had bribed. She was a night shift floater, overworked and under-caffeinated. Her head bobbed. Her chin hit her chest. She jerked awake, looked at the monitor, and then let her eyes drift shut again. She was the gatekeeper to my freedom, and she was falling asleep on the job. I tested my limbs again. The paralysis from the sedatives Evans had pumped into me earlier was fading, replaced by a dull, heavy ache in my muscles. I flexed my fingers. I rotated my ankles. I was weak, weaker than I had been in 30 years, but I could move. I could fight. My plan was simple but dangerous. I had to disconnect the sensors without triggering the flatline alarm. I had to slip past the sleeping nurse. I had to find an exit that wasn't covered by security cameras, and I had to do it all while wearing a hospital gown that left my backside exposed to the wind. But before I could make my move, the sliding glass door to my room hissed open. I froze. I went back to playing the corpse. I slowed my breathing. I let my face go slack. It wasn't Evan. The footsteps were too light. It wasn't Brad. The stride was too hesitant. I heard a sniffle, a soft, wet sound of someone trying to hold back tears. I risked a peek through my eyelashes. It was Maya. My granddaughter stood at the foot of my bed. She was wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over her head, and she looked like a ghost. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She was trembling so hard her teeth were almost chattering. She looked at the door to make sure no one was watching. Then she crept closer to the side of the bed. "I am so sorry, Grandpa," she whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. "I am so sorry." I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I was alive, that I was going to fix this. But then I saw what she was holding in her hand. It was a syringe. It was small, filled with a clear liquid. It looked exactly like the one Evans had tried to use in the ambulance. My heart hammered against my rib. Brad. He hadn't just threatened her. He had weaponized her. He was too cowardly to do it himself, and Evans was too cautious to come back so soon, so they had sent a 19-year-old girl to finish the job. They had turned my legacy against me. Maya raised the syringe. Her hand was shaking violently. She looked at the IV port on my arm. "Daddy said it is medicine," she whispered to herself like a mantra. She was trying to convince herself. "Daddy said it will help your brain. Daddy said it will make you wake up." Lie. Vicious, manipulative lie. Brad had told her it was a stimulant, a miracle cure, something Evans couldn't give me legally. He had preyed on her love for me to get her to inject the poison that would kill me. She uncapped the needle. She leaned over the bed. She positioned the tip of the needle against the rubber stopper of my IV. "Please wake up," she sobbed quietly. "Please just wake up." She began to push the needle in. I could not wait any longer. If that liquid hit my bloodstream, game over. I snapped my eyes open. I did not blink. I stared right into her face, and I moved. My left hand shot out. It was heavy, sluggish, but fueled by adrenaline. I grabbed her wrist. Maya gasped. It was a sound of pure terror. She tried to pull away, but I held on. The syringe fell from her fingers and bounced onto the sheet. "Grandpa," she shrieked, but the sound died in her throat, coming out as a strangled squeak. "Shh," I hissed. She stared at me, her eyes wide as saucers. She looked at my hand gripping her wrist. She looked at my face. She thought she was looking at a zombie. She thought she was looking at the dead rising. "Do not scream, Maya," I whispered, my voice raspy and dry. "Do not make a sound. You are awake," she stammered. "The medicine, it is not medicine, baby," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "It is poison." She froze. The words hit her like a physical slap. She looked at the syringe on the bed. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No. Daddy said, Doctor, Evans couldn't give it to you because of the insurance. He said it was an experimental peptide. He said it would bring you back." "Brad lied," I said firmly. "Just like he lied about the investors. Just like he lied about the Russian." "How do you know about the Russian?" she whispered. "I heard them, Maya. I heard everything. I was awake when they brought me in. I was awake when they planned to pull the plug tomorrow night." She collapsed into the chair beside the bed, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. The reality of her father's betrayal was crushing her. She had almost killed the man she loved most in the world because she trusted the man who was supposed to protect her. He said if I didn't do it, they would take everything, she cried. He said we would lose the penthouse. He said I wouldn't be able to go back to college. He said you were suffering, Grandpa. He said this was mercy. "Mercy is not a needle in the dark," I said. "Mercy is truth." I sat up. The room spun, but I gritted my teeth and forced the world to stop tilting. I reached out and took the syringe. I capped it. I put it in the pocket of my hospital gown. "Evidence. Maya, listen to me," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We do not have time for tears. Your father is desperate. He is dangerous. If he finds out I am awake, or if he finds out you failed, he will not stop. He will hurt us both." "What do we do?" she asked, looking at me like she used to when she was 6 years old and had scraped her knee. She needed me to fix it. "I need to get out of here," I said. "But I cannot walk out the front door in this gown. There is a guard. There are cameras. I need cover." She wiped her eyes on her sleeve. She looked around the room. She was a smart girl. She was a king. She started thinking. "The laundry cart," she said. I passed it in the hallway. "The night staff is doing the linen exchange." I shook my head. "Too risky." They checked the carts. Then she looked at her backpack. She had brought a large canvas bag. I brought clothes," she said. "Daddy told me to bring a suit for the funeral home. He said to have it ready. My own son-in-law had sent my death suit with my assassin. The arrogance was breathtaking. "I do not want the suit," I said. "I want something else." "Did you see the janitorial closet near the elevator?" She nodded. "Go there," I instructed. "It is usually unlocked during the shift change. Get me a jumpsuit, a gray one, and a cap, and get me a bucket and a mop." "A mop? Nobody looks at the janitor." "Maya," I said, "nobody looks at the help. Brad taught me that tonight when he made me use the freight elevator. We are going to use his own prejudice against him." She stood up. The fear was still in her eyes, but something else was there too. Determination. She was angry. Good. Anger gets things done. I will be right back, she whispered. She slipped out the door. I watched the nurse. She was still dozing. I went to work. I carefully peeled the tape off the sensors on my chest. I didn't pull them off. That would trigger the alarm. I slid them down my torso, sticking them to the mattress so the machine would still read a signal. A flat, lifeless signal, but not a disconnect alarm. It would look like the patient had moved or the leads were loose. It bought me minutes. I pulled the IV out of my arm. Blood welled up dark and thick. I pressed my thumb against it until it stopped, then wrapped it with a piece of gauze from the bedside table. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My feet hit the cold floor. My knees wobbled, threatening to buckle. I grabbed the bed rail. You are not old, I told myself. You are seasoned. Move. The door opened again. Maya slipped in. She was carrying a bundle of gray fabric and a blue baseball cap. I got it, she said. The closet was open. I stripped off the gown. I didn't care about modesty. I pulled on the gray jumpsuit. It was too big in the waist and too short in the legs, but it fit. I put on the cap, pulling it low over my eyes. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like Reginald King, titan of industry. I looked like an old man who mopped floors for minimum wage. I looked invisible. Perfect, I said. What about me? Maya asked. You have to stay, I said. You have to go home. You have to tell your father you did it. What? She recoiled. I can't lie to him. He will know. You have to, Maya. If he thinks I am still alive and waking up, he will hunt me down. If he thinks the injection worked, he will relax. He will wait for Evans to call him in the morning with the news that I passed away in my sleep. That buys me time. It buys me 24 hours to destroy him. But the machine, she pointed to the monitor, it is still beeping. Leave that to me, I said. I went to the ventilator. I reached for the power cord. When you leave, I said, tell the nurse at the station that I moved. Tell her the alarms are annoying you. Make a scene. Be a brat. Distract her. I can do that, she said, a small grim smile appearing on her face. I took her face in my hand. You are the bravest person I know, Maya. I am going to fix this. I promise you, I am going to get your future back. She hugged me. It was a desperate, bone-crushing hug. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, kid. Now go. She left the room. Through the glass, I saw her approach the nurse's station. I saw her slamming her hand on the counter. The sleeping nurse jumped up, startled. Maya was shouting, pointing at my room, acting the part of the distraught, entitled granddaughter. The nurse stood up, coming around the desk to calm her down. Her back was to the corridor. Now. I grabbed the bucket and mop Maya had left by the door. I stepped out of the room, keeping my head down. I pushed the bucket, letting the wheels squeak. I walked right past the security guard Brad had posted. He was looking at his phone, watching a football game. He saw a gray jumpsuit and a mop. He looked right through me. I walked down the hallway. I turned the corner. I made it to the service elevator, the same freight elevator they had forced me to use to enter the party. I pressed the button. The doors opened. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel. I looked tired. I looked old, but my eyes were burning. Reggie King was officially dead to the world, but the janitor in the gray jumpsuit was about to take out the trash. The digital clock on the wall flickered to 200 a.m. The hospital room was submerged in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft, mechanical hum of the ventilation system. I lay perfectly still, controlling my breathing to mimic the deep, slow rhythm of deep sleep. My eyes were closed, but my senses were sharper than they had ever been. I could smell the sharp antiseptic cleaner, the stale air of illness, and the faint, lingering scent of the cafeteria dinner I had refused to eat. My plan was dangerous, perhaps even foolish for a man of my age with a failing heart, but staying here was a death sentence. I had been waiting for 3 hours for the night nurse, a young man named Kevin, who spent more time scrolling on his phone than checking patients, to fall into his usual mid-shift slumber at the station down the hall. I had heard his heavy footsteps fade away 40 minutes ago. The corridor outside was quiet. This was my window. I shifted my weight slowly, testing the limits of my body. My muscles screamed in protest, stiff and atrophied from days of forced confinement, but the fire of survival burned hotter than the pain. I was about to reach for the IV line taped to the back of my hand when the door handle turned. The sound was faint, a metallic click that echoed like a gunshot as still. I froze. My hand dropped back to the sheets. I resumed my performance of the comatose patient, letting my jaw go slack and my breathing deepen. Light from the hallway spilled across the floor in a widening wedge. A shadow slipped inside. It was too small to be a doctor, too hesitant to be a nurse. The figure moved with a trembling stealth, creeping toward the bed. I kept my eyes slit open, just a fraction peering through my eyelashes. As the figure stepped into the pale glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, my heart hammered against my rib. It was Maya. My granddaughter stood by my bedside. She looked terrifyingly young and fragile in the semi-darkness. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen, and her cheeks were wet with tears that she furiously wiped away with the sleeve of her oversized hoodie. She was shaking her entire body, vibrating with a fear so palpable it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. I watched paralyzed paralyzed by confusion as she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small syringe. It was already filled with a clear liquid. My mind raced. Why was Maya here? What was she doing? She raised the syringe, her hand trembling so violently that she had to use her other hand to steady it. She looked at the injection port on my IV line. "I am sorry, Grandpa," she whispered. Her voice was a broken thread of sound barely audible over the hum of the machinery. "Please forgive me. I have to do this." She leaned in, bringing the needle closer to the plastic tube that fed directly into my vein. I could not wait any longer. I opened my eyes fully and surged up. My hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. The grip was tighter than I expected, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and horror. Maya gasped, a strangled sound of pure terror. She tried to pull away, but I held fast. The syringe slipped from her clammy fingers and clattered onto the linoleum floor. It rolled under the bed, out of sight but not out of mind. "Grandpa," she cried out, her voice rising in panic. "Hush," I commanded. My voice was raspy from disuse but carried the authority of the patriarch I had once been. "Do not make a sound, Maya. Look at me." She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide with the shock of being caught. She looked at the door, then back at me, as if expecting the police or her father to burst in at any moment. I pulled her closer, forcing her to look into my eye. I needed to break through her panic before she screamed and alerted the staff. "Why, Maya?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. "Why were you going to do that?" She collapsed onto the side of the bed, burying her face in her hands. Sobs racked her small frame. I released her wrist and placed my hand gently on her head, stroking her hair the way I used to when she was a toddler and had scraped her knee. I waited. I let her cry until the initial storm passed and she could speak. "Dad made me," she choked out. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. My son, her father. He had sent his own daughter to finish the job. He lacked the courage to do himself. "He said it was medicine for your brain," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush of confession. "He said the doctors were letting you suffer. He said this medicine would help your brain heal, but the hospital wouldn't allow it because it was too expensive. He said, if I loved you, I had to come here tonight and give it to you. He drove me here. He is waiting in the parking lot." I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing the depth of the betrayal. It was not enough that he had stolen my property, forged my signature, and tried to have me declared incompetent. Now he was weaponizing the innocence of my granddaughter, turning her love for me into a tool for murder. He knew that if she administered the dose and I died, the investigation would likely rule it a medical error or at worst implicate a minor, sparing him the consequences. It was a plan of singular cruelty. "Did he tell you what was in the syringe?" I asked gently. "He said it was a high dose of vitamins and memory enhancers," she said, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "But Grandpa, he looked so scary when he gave it to me. He grabbed my arm and told me that if I didn't do it, you would never remember me again. He said you would die forgetting my name. I didn't want you to forget me." I felt a tear slide down my own cheek. I wiped it away quickly. There was no time for grief. "Not yet. Maya, listen to me very carefully," I said, taking both her hands in mine. "Your father lied to you. That was not medicine. That was poison. He wanted you to kill me." "No," she shook her head violently. "No, Dad wouldn't." "He would," I said firmly. "He has done terrible things, Maya. Things I have tried to protect you from. But tonight he crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. If you had given me that shot, I would be dead right now and you would carry that burden for the rest of your life. That is what he was willing to do to you." The reality of my words settled over her. She looked at the empty space on the floor where the syringe had fallen. Her face crumpled, the illusion of her father's authority shattering under the weight of the truth. She was smart. She knew deep down that loving fathers do not send their children on secret missions in the middle of the night with unmarked syringe. "I'm scared, Grandpa," she whispered. "What do we do? He is waiting for me. If I go back out there without doing it, he will be furious." "You are not going back to him," I said. "We are leaving together." "Leave?" she asked, looking around the sterile room. "But you are sick. You can't walk." "I am not as sick as they want you to believe," I replied. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The room spun for a moment, black spots dancing in my vision, but I gritted my teeth and forced the world to steady itself. I ripped the tape from my hand and pulled the IV needle out. A droplet of blood welled up bright red against my pale skin. I ignored it. "We need a way out," I said. "I cannot walk out the front door in this gown. The security guard at the desk knows my face. Your father might be watching the main entrance." Maya wiped her face with her sleeve again. Her expression shifted. The fear was still there, but a new resolve was hardening behind her eyes. She was a survivor just like me. "I saw a cart in the hallway," she said. "It was near the elevator. It had laundry bags and uniform." "Go," I commanded. "Bring me anything that will fit. Be quiet as a mouse." She nodded and slipped out of the room. I stood up, my legs trembling under my weight. I held onto the bed frame, forcing strength into my muscles. I thought of my son waiting in the dark parking lot, checking his watch, expecting his daughter to return with news of my demise. The rage I felt was a powerful fuel. It burned away the weakness. It burned away the doubt. Maya returned less than a minute later. She carried a bundle of blue fabric. It was a janitor's jumpsuit, oversized and smelling of industrial detergent. It was the only thing I could grab without without making noise, she whispered. "It is perfect," I said. I shed the hospital gown, the symbol of my vulnerability, and stepped into the jumpsuit. It was too large, the legs bunching at my ankles, but it covered me completely. I zipped it up to my chin. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I did not look like the wealthy patriarch of a business empire. I looked like a ghost, a shadow, a nobody. It was exactly what I needed to be. We moved to the door. I took Maya's hand. Her grip was tight, her palm sweating against mine. "Stay close to me," I instructed. "If anyone stops us, you are my granddaughter, and I am taking you home because you felt sick visiting a relative. Do not say a word about your father." We stepped into the corridor. It was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, clinical shadows. We walked past the nurse's station. Kevin was still asleep, his head resting on his folded arms, a small pool of drool forming on the paperwork beneath him. We moved past him like phantom. We reached the service elevator at the end of the hall. I pressed the button and held my breath. The wait was agonizing. Every second felt like an hour. I expected the doors to slide open and reveal a team of doctors, or worse, my son. The bell dinged softly. The doors opened. The car was empty. We stepped inside and I pressed the button for the basement level. "The parking garage would be too dangerous if your father is watching," I reasoned aloud. "We will go out through the loading dock." As the elevator descended, I looked at Maya. She was staring at the floor numbers, changing her face pale. "Grandpa," she asked softly, "where will we go? We can't go home." "No," I said. "Home is not a safe place anymore. We are going to see an old friend of mine, a man who owes me a favor, a man who knows how to handle people like your father." The elevator doors opened onto the basement level. The air here was cooler, smelling of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. We navigated through the maze of crates and medical waste bins until we found the rear exit. I pushed the heavy metal bar and the door swung open. The night air hit us cold and biting. It tasted of freedom. We were in the alley behind the hospital. The city's sounds were distant, a muted roar of traffic and sirens. We walked quickly, putting distance between us and the building that had been my prison. I did not look back. I knew that by sunrise my empty bed would be discovered. The syringe under the bed would be found. Questions would be asked. My son would realize his plan had failed, and his panic would set in. But by then, we would be gone. As we reached the main street and hailed a passing taxi, I looked at Maya one last time. She was safe. I was alive. The war for my life and my legacy had officially begun, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what my next move would be. "Driver," I said as we climbed into the back seat, "take us to the train station, and do not spare the horses." The taxi merged into the flow of traffic, disappearing into the river of lights. We were just two more faces in the city, invisible and untraceable. I squeezed Maya's hand and she squeezed back. We were alive, and that was the only victory that mattered tonight. The rain drummed relentlessly against the window of the safe house, a rhythmic pounding that matched the chaotic tempo of my own heart. It had been 48 hours since Maya and I escaped the hospital. 48 hours of living in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike back. I was no longer the helpless old man lying in a hospital bed waiting to die. I was Reggie the patriarch who had built an empire from nothing, and I was about to go to war. I sat in the dim light of the living room, surrounded by monitors, communication equipment. Across from me sat Vance, a man whose face was a map of scars and hard-won battle. He was the leader of the private investigation team. I had hired a group of former Special Forces operatives who operated in the gray areas where the law hesitated tread. They were expensive, dangerously so, but tonight they were worth every penny. "We are in position," Vance said, his voice a low rumble. "The target location is quiet. Security systems are bypassed." On the screen, grainy night vision footage showed the exterior of Brad's office building. It was a sleek glass tower in the financial district, a monument to the success my son-in-law claimed to have. But I knew better. Towers built on sand always fall, and I was about to kick away the foundation. "Do it," I commanded. My voice was steady cold as the steel of the cane I now used to walk. "Get inside. Find everything. Leave no stone unturned." I watched as the shadows on the screen moved. Vance's team was efficient, moving with a fluid, predatory grace. They breached the service entrance in seconds. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the arms of my chair. This was the office of Sterling Global, the investment fund Brad had been boasting about for years. He had always been vague about the details, hiding behind jargon, flashy presentation. Tonight, the curtain would be pulled back. The camera feed switched to the interior. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness of the executive suite. It was lavish. Leather furniture, modern art, a mahogany desk that cost more than my first car. It was a stage set designed to project power and wealth. The team began the work. They were not looking for cash. They were looking for information. Hard drives were cloned. Filing cabinets were picked open. Documents were photographed page by page. For an hour, the only sound in the safe house was the hum of the servers and the occasional crackle of static from the radio. Then Vance's voice came through the earpiece again. "Reggie, we found the ledger. You need to see this. We are uploading the files to your server now." A progress bar appeared appeared on my laptop screen. 20%, 50%, completed. I opened the first folder. It was a digital scan of the internal accounting records for Sterling Global. I adjusted my glasses, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers. I had been a businessman for 40 years. I knew how to read a balance sheet. I knew the flow of money like I knew the flow of my own blood. But what I saw made my blood run cold. There was no investment strategy. There were no assets. There was no trading. The numbers were a fiction. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, massive and unstable. Money came in from new investors and was immediately funneled out to pay returns to older investors, creating the illusion of profit. But the vast majority of it was being siphoned off into offshore accounts controlled by Brad, and to my horror, my own son. They were not just bad businessmen, they were thieves. But as I clicked through the folders, the true horror of their crime began to reveal itself. I found a folder labeled Marketing and Outreach. I opened a file and saw my own face staring back at me. It was a brochure, a glossy, high-quality pamphlet designed to sell the fund. On the cover was a photo of me and Brad taken years ago at a charity gala. I was smiling, my hand on his shoulder. The text underneath read, "Trusted by legends, the legacy of Reggie Sterling." He had used me. He had used my name, my reputation, the legacy I had spent a lifetime building with sweat and integrity to validate his fraud. He had wrapped his lies in my credibility. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. I clicked on the next folder. Client list. This was the moment that broke me. I expected to see the names of faceless corporations or wealthy venture capitalists who could afford to lose a gamble. I scrolled down the list and the names began to jump out at me, familiar and heartbreak. Mrs. Higgin, the elderly widow who sat in the third pew at my church every Sunday. She had baked a pie for me when my wife passed away. She lived on a fixed pension and the small life insurance policy her husband had left her. The ledger showed she had invested $50,000, her entire life saving. Deacon Jones, a man who had marched for civil rights, a man whose hands were calloused from 50 years of labor at the auto plant. He had invested $80,000. The list went on and on. It was a roll call of my community, the people I prayed with, the people I grew up with, the people who looked at me with respect because they thought I was a pillar of the community. They had trusted Brad because they trusted me. They did not invest in Sterling Global because of the graphs or the projection. They invested because Brad was Reggie's son-in-law. They invested because they thought if Reggie is involved, it must be safe. If Reggie is involved, it must be honorable. Brad had not just stolen their money. He had stolen my honor. He had taken the trust of the black community, a trust that is hard-won and easily shattered, and he had monetized it for his own greed. I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. The physical pain of my injuries was nothing compared to the agony of this betrayal. I thought of Mrs. Higgins smiling as she handed over her check, believing she was securing her grandchildren's future. I thought of Deacon Jones shaking Brad's hand, thinking he was making a wise move for his family. They were all going to lose everything. When this house of cards collapsed, and it would collapse, they would be left with nothing. No retirement, no safety net, just the bitter taste of betrayal. And they would blame me. How could they not? My face was on the brochure. My name was the bait. I slammed my fist onto the desk, rattling the equipment. A low, guttural growl of pure rage escaped my throat. He killed me, I whispered to the empty room. He didn't just try to push me off a cliff physically. He killed my name. He killed my soul. Vance's voice cut through my despair. Reggie, we found something else. In the bottom drawer. It is a burn bag. Documents scheduled for destruction. Send it! I commanded, my voice shaking with fury. The image appeared. It was a series of emails between Brad and my son. They were discussing the liquidity crisis. They knew the scheme was collapsing. They knew they needed a massive injection of capital to keep the lie going for just a few more months so they could finalize their exit strategy and flee the country. And then I saw it. The email dated 3 days before my abduction. Subject, the inheritance. The text was brief and chilling. The old man is the only way out. If we get control of his estate, we can plug the hole. We need his power of attorney. We need his assets liquid. If he doesn't sign, we have to accelerate the timeline. He cannot be allowed to ask questions. There it was, the motive in black and white. They didn't try to kill me just because they were greedy. They tried to kill me because their Ponzi scheme was imploding and my death was the only thing that could cover their track. They were going to use my life's work to pay off the early investors of their scam just enough to buy them time to disappear with the rest. I looked at the screen, at the faces of my friends on the victim list, at the cold calculation of my son and son-in-law. The grief in my heart hardened into something colder, something sharper. It transformed into a resolve that was stronger than steel. I wiped the tears from my face. I picked up the phone. Vance, I said, get out of there. Make sure they don't know you were ever inside. We have what we need. Copy that, Vance replied. We are ghosts. I ended the call and looked at the digital evidence spread out before me. This was the weapon I needed. But I realized then that simple justice, simple jail time was not enough. If I went to the police now, the fund would be frozen. The money would be tied up in litigation for years. My friends, the victims, would likely get pennies on the dollar after the lawyers took their cut. Mrs. Higgins would still lose her home. Deacon Jones would still be destitute. I could not let that happen. I had a responsibility. They had trusted me, and even though I didn't know about about the fraud. It was my name on the line. It was my burden to bear. I needed to do more than just expose Brad. I needed to fix this. I needed to get their money back before the authorities shut everything down. I leaned back in the chair, the gears of my mind turning. I was a business. I knew how to move money. I knew how to leverage assets, and now I knew their playbook. Brad and my son thought they were playing chess. They thought they had removed the king from the board. But the king was still in the game, and he was about to make a move they never saw coming. I looked at the picture of Mrs. Higgins on the screen, her kind eyes full of trust. I will make this right, I vowed into the silence of the room. I swear on my life I will get every cent back. And then I will burn their world to the ground. The night was dark, and the storm outside was raging, but inside the safe house, the plan for my counterattack was beginning to take shape. I was no longer just fighting for my survival. I was fighting for the soul of my community, and God help anyone who stood in my way. I sat alone in the humming silence of the safe house, the glow of the monitors casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The discovery of the Ponzi scheme had been a blow to my reputation and my community, a wound to my honor. But there was one more stone I had to turn over, one more dark corner of my life I had to illuminate, even though I knew the light would burn me. On the far right screen, a separate folder blinked, waiting for my command. It was labeled simply Keisha. 12 months ago, I had done something that shamed me at the time. I had hired a security firm to install hidden cameras in my daughter's home. It was not an act of malice or control, but born of a father's unsettling intuition. I had gone over for Sunday dinner and saw something in her eyes that did not belong there. It was a flicker of resentment, a coldness that appeared when she thought I was not looking. She had asked too many questions about my estate, planning her voice height with an urgency that felt wrong. I told myself I was being a paranoid old man, that grief over my wife was clouding my judgment, but I could not shake the feeling that the wolves were circling. So I installed the eyes I needed to protect her, or perhaps to protect myself from. I had never looked at the footage. I let the server record and overwrite, hoping I would never have a reason to search the archives. But tonight, I had a reason. My hand trembled as I moved the mouse. I navigated to the date stamp from 3 weeks ago, just days before my abduction. I clicked the file. The video sprang to life. It was the kitchen island in Keisha's home, a place where I had bounced my granddaughter Maya on my knee, a place where we had shared Thanksgiving meals. The lighting was warm and domestic. A bottle of expensive red wine stood open on the counter. Keisha was there. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine by the stem. She looked relaxed, comfortable in her own home. Brad was pacing in the background, looking agitated, running his hands through his hair. I leaned in, studying my daughter's face. I was looking for the signs of coercion. I was looking for the fear. I desperately wanted to see a woman who was trapped, a wife who was being bullied by a dominant criminal husband. I wanted to see her hesitate. I wanted to see her cry. I wanted to believe that my little girl was a victim in this tragedy. Brad slammed a stack of papers onto the marble counter. "We need the signature, Keisha," he said, his voice tight with panic. "The bank is asking questions. If we do not leverage the beach property by Friday, the fund is going to dry up. We need the liquidity." Keisha took a slow sip of her wine. She did not flinch at his outburst. She set the glass down with a deliberate, calm movement. She picked up the document. It was a mortgage deed for the beach house, the property I had bought with my late wife, the place where we had scattered her ashes. "I cannot ask him to sign this, Brad," she said. "He knows the value. He will ask what the money is for. He is old, but he is not senile." I held my breath. Here it was, her resistance, her loyalty. Brad leaned over the counter, his face close to hers. "Then we do it without him," he hissed. "You know his signature better than anyone. You handled his checks when your mother was sick. Do it." I watched, praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening anymore. I prayed for her to throw the wine in his face. I prayed for her to tear up the paper. I prayed for her to scream and tell him to get out. Keisha picked up a pen. She did not look at Brad. She looked at the paper. She did not tremble. She did not hesitate. There was no gun to her head. There was no threat of violence hanging in the air. She brought the pen to the paper and began to write. I watched in high definition as my daughter, the child I had walked to school, the woman I had walked down the aisle, forged my name. She did it with a practiced ease, a casual fluidity that suggested this was not the first time. She signed page after page, mortgage documents, loan guarantees, transfers of power. She was signing away my life, my legacy, and my security. And she was smiling. It was a small, tight smile, a look of satisfaction. She finished the last signature and capped the pen. She pushed the stack of papers toward her husband. "There," she said. "It is done. Are you happy now?" Brad grabbed the papers, flipping through them, checking the signatures. "It is perfect," he muttered. "This buys us 6 months, maybe a year." Keisha picked up her wine glass again. She swirled the dark liquid, staring into the depths of it. I froze the video. I needed to breathe. The pain in my chest was physical, a crushing weight that made my lungs burn. It wasn't a heart attack. It was heartbreak, pure and absolute. My daughter was not a victim. She was a co-conspirator. She was an active participant in the theft of her father's life. But the video was not over. I pressed play. I needed to hear it all. I needed to drink this cup of poison to the dregs. Brad was pouring himself a drink now, his hands shaking slightly. "I hate doing this," he said, sounding almost convincing. "I hate lying to him. He has been good to us." Keisha laughed. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. It was a cold, brittle sound, devoid of warmth or humor. "Good to us," she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "He has controlled us. He dangles his money like a carrot. He judges everything we do. He looks at you like you are a failure, and he looks at me like I am still a child who needs her allowance." She took a long drink of wine, her eyes hardening. "He has had his time, Brad. He had his empire. He had his glory. Now it is our turn. Why should we wait until he dies of old age to enjoy what is rightfully ours? We are the ones living now. We are the ones who need it." Brad looked at her, seemingly surprised by her venom. "He is your father, Keisha," he said weakly. "And that is the only reason he is not in a nursing home already," she snapped back. Then she said the words that would haunt me until my dying day, the words that severed the last cord connecting us. She looked directly at the papers she had just forged, her face twisted in a look of pure resentment. "The old man has lived too long," she said. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "Mom should have taken him with her when she went. It would have been a mercy for everyone." The room spun. Mom should have taken him with her. She was wishing I had died with my wife. She was invoking the memory of her mother, the woman who had loved her more than life itself, to justify her greed. She was saying that my survival, my grief, my continued existence was an inconvenience to her lifestyle. I sat back in the chair, the silence of the room rushing back in to fill the space left by her word. I felt cold, a deep, penetrating chill that started in my marrow and worked its way out. This was the final betrayal. The son and son-in-law I could understand. Men are often driven by ego and greed, but a daughter who had held my hand at her mother's funeral and promised we would get through it together. She was not protecting. She was waiting for me to die. And when I didn't die fast enough, she decided to bury me while I was still breathing. I looked at her face on the screen, frozen in that mask of disdain. I looked for the little girl who used to wait by the window for me to come home from work. I looked for the teenager who cried on my shoulder when she had her first heartbreak. They were gone. Perhaps they had never really existed. Perhaps I had loved a reflection, an image I wanted to see, while the real Keisha grew into this stranger right in front of my eyes. She was not a victim. She was not a pawn. She was the queen on the chessboard, moving the pieces, signing the papers, wishing for my death. I reached out and closed the laptop. The screen went black, cutting off the image of her betrayal. I sat in the dark for a long time. I did not cry. I had no tears left. The grief I had felt for my family, the hope that there was some misunderstanding, some way to save them, evaporated. It was replaced by a clarity that was as sharp and cold as a diamond. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-slicked street. "You are right, Keisha," I whispered to the glass. "The old man has lived a long time." I gripped my cane, my knuckles turning white. "But he is not dead yet, and he is done being a father. Now I am just a man who has been wrong, and you are about to learn that the old man still has teeth." The betrayal was complete. The circle was closed. There was no one left to trust, no one left to save except myself and Maya. The time for sentiment was over. It was time to bring the house down. The rain outside had ceased, leaving behind a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press against the walls of the safe house. I sat in the corner clutching the silver-framed photograph of Betty that I had managed to salvage from my belongings. It was a picture taken on our 40th anniversary. She was wearing the blue silk dress she loved, the one that matched her eyes, and she was smiling at me with that look of infinite patience and love that had been my anchor for 4 decades. For 3 years, I had looked at this photo and felt only the hollow ache of loss, the resignation that her heart had simply given out, tired from a life of loving too hard. I had accepted her death as the will of God, but tonight, God was not in this room. Only the devil and the details remained. A terrible cold suspicion had taken root in my mind after watching the video of Keisha. If they were capable of poisoning me, if they were capable of sending my granddaughter into a hospital room with a syringe, how far back did this rot go? The question gnawed at me like a rat in the walls. I remembered the night Betty died. I remembered the suddenness of it. I remembered how helpful Brad had been, how he had stepped in to handle the doctors while I was paralyzed by grief. At the time, I thought it was kindness. Now the memory tasted like act. "Vance," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow to my own ears. "I need you to do one more thing." Vance looked up from his console, his face illuminated by the blue light of the screens. He saw the look in my eyes, a look that went beyond anger into a dark, desolate place. "Name it, Reggie. I want you to pull the medical files from Betty's death," I said. "I want you to find everything. The toxicology reports, the attending physician's notes, the pharmacy logs. Everything." Vance hesitated for a fraction of a second. "That is a closed file, Reggie. It has been 3 years. Digging that up will not be easy, and it will not be pleasant." "Do it!" I commanded, slamming my hand onto the armrest of the chair. The team went to work. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the frantic clicking of keyboard. I stared at Betty's face in the photograph. I whispered an apology to her frozen image. I asked her to forgive me for disturbing her rest, but I needed to know. I needed to know if I had buried my wife or if I had buried a crime scene. Hours passed. The sun began to bleed a gray light through the blinds, signaling the start of another day I wasn't supposed to see. "I have it," Vance said softly. I walked over to the main monitor. My legs felt heavy as if I were walking through deep water. Vance pulled up a scanned document. It was the hospital log from the night of May 12, 3 years ago. I leaned in, adjusting my glasses. My eyes scanned the medical jargon, searching for the truth hidden in the clinical language. "Look here," Vance said, pointing to a line in the medication administration record. The attending physician was Dr. Evans. The name struck a chord of recognition. Evans was not her regular cardiologist. He was a man I had seen at the country club with Brad. They played golf together. I remembered Brad introducing him once as a man who understood how to get things done. Vance highlighted a section of the report. "She was admitted for mild arrhythmia," Vance explained, his voice devoid of emotion, delivering the facts as they were. "Standard protocol is a low dose of beta blockers and observation. But look at what Evans prescribed." I looked at the numbers. Even with my limited medical knowledge, they seemed wrong. "He ordered a high concentration of digoxin," Vance continued. "It is a drug used for heart failure, but the therapeutic window is extremely narrow. The dose he ordered was 3 times the maximum safe limit for a woman of her weight and age." I felt the room spin. Digoxin toxicity. It causes nausea, confusion, and eventually cardiac arrest. It mimics a natural heart attack perfectly if you do not look too closely at the blood work. "Keep reading," Vance said. He sounded angry now. I scrolled down to the authorization section. "Because the dosage was non-standard and considered experimental for her condition, the hospital required a liability waiver signed by the next of kin or a legal guardian." I was at the hospital that night. I was sitting in the waiting room praying. I never saw this document. I never signed it. But there was a signature at the bottom of the page. It was bold, arrogant, and familiar. Bradley Sterling. Underneath his signature, the title was printed in block letters. Temporary Medical Guardian. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a train wreck. I remembered now. I had stepped out to call the pastor. I had been gone for 20 minutes. Brad had told me he would handle the paperwork. He had told me not to worry about the details. He had declared himself her guardian in my brief absence, signed her death warrant, and handed the pen back to the nurse. They had killed her. It was not an accident. It was not nature. It was a test run. I staggered back from the screen, clutching the edge of the desk for support. A sound tore from my throat, a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed off the walls of the safe house. It was the sound of a man whose heart was being ripped out for the second time. "They practiced on her," I whispered, the realization horrifying in its clarity. "They wanted to see if they could get away with it. They wanted to see if Dr. Evans would play his part. They wanted to see if the autopsy would catch the toxicity. They used my wife, the love of my life, as a laboratory rat to perfect their method of killing me." I looked at the date on the file. It was just a month after I had refused to invest in Brad's first venture capital scheme. He had needed money then, and when I said no, he decided to liquidate the other asset in the family. He decided to remove the one person who would have protected me, the one person who would have seen through his lies. Betty had died so they could learn how to kill me. I sank into the chair, burying my face in my hand. The tears that came were hot and scalding. I cried for the pain she must have felt. I cried for the moments we had stolen from us. I cried for my own blindness. I had invited the devil into my home, let him marry my daughter, and let him stand by my wife's deathbed while he stopped her heart. Vance placed a hand on my shoulder. He said nothing. There were no words for this. After a long time, the tears stopped. The grief in my chest began to cool, hardening into something solid, jagged. It felt like a stone, heavy and immovable. I lifted my head and looked at the screen again. I looked at Brad's signature. I looked at Dr. Evans' name. I committed them to memory. I burned them into my mind. This changes everything I said. My voice was quiet, terrifyingly calm. Before this moment, I wanted justice. I wanted my money back. I wanted to see them in prison. But prison was too good for this. Prison was a sterile room and 3 meals a day. Prison was safety. They took my wife, I said to the empty room. They stole the last years of her life. They turned her death into a strategic maneuver. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city, a sprawling landscape of concrete and glass. Somewhere out there, Brad was sleeping in a bed bought with stolen money. Somewhere out there, Dr. Evans was playing golf. Somewhere out there, my daughter was drinking wine and wishing I was dead. They think they are playing a game of finance, I said. They think this is about assets and liability. I turned back to Vance. His team was watching me, waiting for orders. "No more police," I said. "Not yet. The police will give them lawyers. The police will give them a trial. I do not want a trial. I want a reckoning." I walked over to the board where we had pinned the pictures of the target. I took the photo of Brad and moved it to the center. I took the photo of Dr. Evans and pinned it next to him. "We are going to destroy them," I said. "We are not just going to take their money. We are going to take their lives apart, piece by piece. I want them to feel the fear Betty felt. I want them to feel the confusion. I want them to know that it is me doing it." I looked at the photo of Betty one last time. "I promise you," I whispered to her, "I will make the rivers run red before I am done. I will make them pay in blood and tears." I turned to Vance. "Find out where Dr. Evans is right now. We are going to pay the good doctor a visit and bring the medical kit. We might need to check his heart." The hunt was no longer about survival. It was about extermination. The old Reggie, the forgiving father, the gentle grandfather, had died in that hospital bed. The man who stood in the safe house now was a ghost fueled by the cold fire of vengeance, and he would not rest until every debt was paid in full. The vibration of the phone against the metal surface of the desk was a small, insignificant sound barely audible over the hum of the surveillance equipment, yet it tore through the silence of the safe house like a scream. I had been staring at the tactical map of the city, plotting the destruction of Dr. Evans, but my attention snapped instantly to the burner phone I had pressed into Maya's hand the night we parted ways at the train station. I had told her only to use it in an emergency, a directive I prayed she would never have to follow. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. The message was short, typed in a hurry, likely with trembling fingers hidden beneath a blanket. He knows. He found the syringe. I am locked in my room. He says he is sending me to a school in Switzerland tomorrow. Please help me, Grandpa. I am scared. The air left my lungs. The strategic clarity I had possessed only moments ago, the cold, calculating rage that had fueled my investigation into my wife's death, evaporated in a flash of pure white-hot panic. I closed my eyes and saw her face, the tear-streaked cheeks in the hospital room, the bravery she had summoned to save my life. She was a child, innocent and bright, and she was being punished for my survival. Brad had found the syringe. He had put the pieces together, and true to his nature, he had not directed his anger at the empty space where I used to be, but at the easiest target available. He was not just a thief and a murderer. He was a bully who tormented children. The threat of a reform school in Switzerland was not an educational opportunity. It was an exile. It was a way to make a witness disappear, to silence the one person who knew the truth about the hospital, effectively burying her in a system where her voice would never be heard. I looked at Vance. He saw the change in my demeanor, the shift from general to grandfather. What is it? He asked, his voice low. We have a problem, I said, my voice rasping. Brad has Maya. He knows she helped me. He is shipping her out of the country. Vance cursed softly. That complicates the timeline. If she leaves the country, getting her back will be a diplomatic nightmare. We need to move now. My mind raced. The original plan had been a slow dismantling, a systematic destruction of their lives while I remained a ghost. But ghosts cannot open locked doors. Ghosts cannot stop a plane. I had to become flesh and blood again. I had to step into the light, even if it meant exposing myself to the wolves. We cannot storm the house, I said, thinking aloud. He has security. If we go in with force, he might hurt her, or he might use her as a shield. He is desperate. Desperate men do irrational things. Then how do we get her? Vance asked. We do not take her, I said, a new dangerous idea forming in the darkness of my mind. We make him bring her to us, or at least we make him lower the drawbridge. I reached for the other phone, the secure line to my attorney, Marcus. Marcus was one of the few men left in this city I trusted with my life. He had been my counsel for 30 years, a man of stone and statutes who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had helped dig the graves for my legal enemies. Marcus answered on the first ring. Reggie, are you safe? He asked. For now, I replied. But the situation has changed. I need you to do something for me, Mark. I need you to tell a lie. I explained the situation. I told him about Maya. I told him about the threat. I told him what I needed him to do. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It is risky, Reggie, Marcus said finally. If he suspects a trap, he will bolt, and he will take the girl with him. He will not bolt, I said, staring at the photo of Brad on the wall. He is greedy, and right now he is terrified because he doesn't know where I am. He thinks I am out here plotting his demise. We need to give him what he wants. We need to give him peace of mind. I hung up and looked at Vance. Get the team ready. We are moving the center of operation, and get the medical transport van. We need to look the part. An hour later, I sat in the back of the van, listening through an earpiece as Marcus made the call. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the calm, professional tone of my lawyer. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, his voice smooth and authoritative. This is Marcus Thorne. I am representing your father-in-law. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. Brad sounded frantic, his voice pitching high with stress. Where is he? Brad demanded. Where is the old man? The police are looking for him. He is a danger to himself. That is actually why I am calling, Marcus said, his tone dropping to a confidential whisper. Reggie contacted me this morning. He is not well, Brad. The episode at the hospital seems to have taken a severe toll on his cognitive faculties. He is confused. He is scared. I clenched my fist. It was painful to hear myself described this way, even if it was a fabrication. It was the very lie they had tried to force upon me, and now I was wearing it like a disguise. Where is he? Brad repeated, more aggressive this time. He checked himself into a private care facility in the next county. Marcus lied. He called me because he wants to go home, but he knows he cannot care for himself. He is lucid enough to understand that he needs a guardian. The silence on the line was heavy with calculation. I could almost hear the gears turning in Brad's head. This was the golden ticket. This This was the solution to all his problems. If I was voluntarily submitting to care, if I was admitting incompetence, his theft would be secure. His crimes would be buried under a medical diagnosis. He wants to see you, Brad. Marcus continued, delivering the hook. He wants to sign the power of attorney papers. He says he trusts you to handle the estate. He just wants to rest. He is tired of fighting. I held my breath. This was the pivot point. If Brad was smart, he would suspect, but Brad was not smart. He was arrogant. He believed he deserved this. He believed he had won. I see, Brad said, his voice dropping, feigning concern. Poor Reggie. I knew he was slipping. I told everyone he was slipping. He wants to do it tonight, Marcus said. He is agitated. He says if you don't come tonight to sign the papers and authorize his transfer to a permanent facility, he is going to walk out the front door and go to the police station to ask for a ride home. We cannot let that happen, can we? No, Brad said quickly. No police. That would just confuse him more. I will send you the address, Marcus said. It is a quiet place, very discreet. Bring the papers. And Brad, yes, bring the family. He has been asking for Keisha and the girl. He says he wants to see his granddaughter one last time before he settles in. He says he has a gift for her. There was a pause. I prayed he wouldn't see through it. Asking for Maya was the risk. Keisha is not feeling well, Brad said. And Maya is in trouble. She is being disciplined, Mr. Sterling. Marcus interrupted, his voice hardening just a fraction. Reggie was very specific. He will not sign the power of attorney unless he sees his family. He feels abandoned. If you want control of the assets tonight, you need to humor him. It is a small price to pay for the keys to the kingdom, isn't it? I closed my eyes. The bait was dangling. Fine, Brad snapped. Send the address. We will be there in an hour. The line went dead. I exhaled a breath I felt I had been holding for days. He was coming. He was bringing her. We did not go to a nursing home. We went to an old estate on the outskirts of the city, a property owned by a shell company Marcus managed. It was a large, imposing house that looked enough like a private sanitarium to fool anyone at night. Vance and his team had already secured the perimeter. They were ghosts in the garden shadows in the hallway. I went into the main study. We set the stage. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, a blanket draped over my legs, my hand trembling slightly on the armrest. I dimmed the lights. I placed a glass of water and a few bottles of pills on the table next to me. I had to look broke. I had to look defeated. Waiting was the hardest part. Every minute stretched into an hour. I kept checking the hidden monitor that showed the driveway. I thought about Maya locked in her room, terrified. I thought about the courage she had shown. She was the only pure thing left in this entire sordid affair, and I would burn the world down before I let them ship her away to be broken by strange. Headlights swept across the front lawn. A black SUV crunched up the gravel driveway. They are here, Vance whispered in my earpiece. 3 sold. Target 1, Target 2, and the girl. No sign of external security. He feels safe. I watched the screen. Brad got out of the driver's side. He looked impatient, adjusting his jacket. He opened the back door and pulled Maya out. She looked small and defeated, her head hanging low. He gripped her arm tight, too tight. Keisha got out of the passenger side, looking around with disdain, checking her phone. They walked up the step. I heard the front door open. Marcus was there to greet them. Right this way, Marcus said. He is in the study. Please keep your voices down. He is very frail. The footsteps approached the door. I let my head loll to the side slightly, my mouth opening a fraction. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting the exhaustion I truly felt take over. The door opened. Brad walked in first, striding with the confidence of a man coming to collect a debt. Keisha followed, looking bored. And then Maya. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. She started to make a sound, a cry of recognition, but Brad yanked her arm. Quiet, he hissed. Well, Reggie, Brad said, his voice booming in the quiet room. You certainly led us on a chase. I lifted my head slowly, acting as though the effort cost me everything. I blinked, trying to focus on him. Brad, I croaked. You came. Of course I came, he said, walking over to the desk and placing a thick leather folder on it. We are family. We are here to take care of you. He pulled a pen from his pocket. Just sign the papers, Reggie. Then you can rest. You can sleep for as long as you want. I looked at him, then at Keisha, who was leaning against the doorframe, refusing to meet my eyes. Then I looked at Maya. She was staring at me, confusion warring with hope in her face. She saw the blanket. She saw the pill. She thought I had given up. Come here, Maya, I whispered. She looked at her father. He nodded, a cruel smirk on his face. Go say goodbye to your grandfather. Maya walked toward me. When she was close enough, I reached out my hand. She took it. Her skin was cold. I am sorry, Grandpa, she whispered, tears spilling. I tried. I squeezed her hand. A firm, strong squeeze. A signal. Her eyes snapped to mine. She saw the clarity there. She saw the fire that was not extinguished, but merely banked, waiting for the oxygen of this very moment. You did good, child, I said, my voice suddenly losing its tremor. You did very good. I looked up at Brad. I dropped the act. I sat up straight, the blanket falling away to reveal that I was fully dressed, not in pajamas, but in a suit. Brad frowned. What is this sign the papers, old man? I am not signing anything, Brad, I said, my voice filling the room with the resonance of command. Brad laughed, a nervous barking sound. You are confused. Marcus, give him the pen. Marcus stepped forward. He did not offer a pen. He closed the door behind Keisha and locked it. The click was loud and final. Brad spun around. What are you doing? I stood up. I picked up the cane, not to lean on it, it, but holding it like a weapon. I said, I am not signing, I repeated. And you are not sending my granddaughter to Switzerland. Brad's face turned red. He took a step toward me, his hands balling into fists. Listen to me, you senile old bat. I am in charge here. I have the power. You are going to sign that paper, or I am going to make you wish you died on that cliff. You tried that already, I said coldly. You missed. I pressed a button on the underside of the desk. The side door of the study burst open. Vance and two of his men stepped into the room. They were not wearing suits. They were wearing tactical gear. They did not look like lawyers. They looked like consequence. Brad froze. Keisha let out a small scream. What is going on? Brad stammered, looking from the men to me. Who are these people? These are the witnesses, I said. And you, Brad, are done. I looked at Maya, who was standing by my side, her eyes wide with awe. I told you we were going to see a friend who knows how to handle people like your father, I said to her. I turned my gaze back to Brad, whose arrogance was crumbling into terror. You wanted a meeting, Brad. You wanted a signature. Well, you have my attention. Now let's talk about the weather in Switzerland. I hear the prisons are very cold this time of year. The trap was sprung, the bait had been taken, and now the predator had become the prey. The rented villa was a cavernous, cold space on the outskirts of the city, chosen specifically for its isolation and its atmosphere of faded grandeur. It smelled of old dust and lemon polish, a scent that would forever remind me of this night. I sat in a high-backed leather chair in the center of the drawing room, a blanket draped heavily over my legs to conceal the strength that still resided in my muscles. I had spent the last hour practicing the tremors in my hands, rehearsing the shallow, wheezing breath of a man defeated by life. The hidden cameras were positioned perfectly. One was behind the mirror above the fireplace, another in the spine of a book on the shelf, and a third deeply embedded in the floral arrangement on the desk. They were tiny, unblinking eyes waiting to witness the death of a family and the birth of justice. The sound of tires crushing gravel outside announced their arrival. I did not move to the window. I let my head loll forward, my chin resting on my chest, and waited. The front door opened without a knock. They did not feel the need to knock. To them, this was not a visit. It was a foreclosure. Brad entered first. He brought the cold night air in with him, along with the stench of arrogance that seemed to radiate from his pores. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the average man earned in a month, but on him, it looked like a costume. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on me with a mixture of contempt and triumph. Keisha followed him. My daughter looked beautiful and terrible. She wore her stony expression like armor, refusing to look at the corners of the room, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor before slowly, reluctantly lifting it to meet mine. I let out a soft, pathetic groan and shifted in the chair, making the leather creak. I reached for the glass of water on the side table, allowing my hand to shake violently so that the water sloshed over the rim and stained the wood. Brad laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a sound. Look at him, he said to Keisha, gesturing at me as if I were a piece of broken furniture. He is pathetic. We should have done this months ago. Keisha did not laugh, but she did not defend me either. She walked to the other side of the room and stood with her arms crossed, distancing herself from the reality of what they were doing. Brad pulled a heavy wooden chair across the floor, the legs scraping loudly against the parquet. He sat directly in front of me, leaning forward so that his face was uncomfortably close. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. Wake up, Reggie, he said, snapping his fingers in front of my face. We do not have all night. I blinked slowly, forcing my eyes to struggle with the focus. I looked at him with what I hoped was a perfect mix of confusion and fear. Brad, I whispered, my voice cracking dryly. Is that you? Where is Maya? You said you would bring Maya. Maya is fine, Brad said dismissively. She is waiting in the car. You signed the papers, and maybe we will let you wave at her through the window. It was a lie, of course. I knew Maya was safe with Vance miles away from this point, but I had to play the part. I slumped further into the chair. I want to go home, Brad, I whimpered. Please, I do not like this place. It is cold. You do not have a home anymore. Old man, Brad spat out. He slammed a thick document onto the table. The sound echoed in the empty room. Your house is being liquidated to cover your debts, he lied smoothly. Your accounts are frozen because of your incompetence. We are the only ones standing between you and the street. I looked at the papers. They were the transfer of power, the total abdication of my rights, my assets, and my freedom. But my money, I said, letting a tear leak from my eye. I worked for 40 years. I have saving. Gone, Brad said. You lost it all, Reggie. Your mind is gone and your money went with it. You made bad investment. You forgot to pay taxes. You are ruined. He uncapped a fountain pen and held it out to me. The gold nib glinted in the dim light. Sign the paper, Reggie. We found a nice facility for you. State-run, but it has a bed. We are doing you a favor. I looked at the pen, then at Keisha. Keisha, I pleaded, turning my gaze to her. Daughter, please, do not let him do this. I am your father. Keisha finally looked at me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the warmth I remembered from her childhood. There was no conflict in her face. face, only a cold, impatient resolve. "Just sign it, Dad," she said. Her voice was flat, monotone. "Stop making this difficult for you. You are sick. You do not know what is happening. We are trying to help you and you are just dragging this out. I am not sick. I just want to live my life. I need a little money, just enough to buy food, just enough to rent a small room." Brad leaned back and laughed again, shaking his head in disbelief. "You still do not get it, do you?" he said. "You are done, Godfather. You are finished. Your time is over." He leaned in again, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, unaware that the microphone in the flower arrangement was catching every syllable. "I will tell you what I'm going to do, Reg. You sign this paper giving us full control of the trust and the properties, and I will give you an allowance." He held up 5 fingers. $5,000 a month, he said. "That is more than you deserve. You can buy all the pudding and blankets you want, but you stay out of our way. You stay silent. You disappear." $5,000, I repeated, testing the word. "Out of million. You are stealing my life, Brad." "I am taking what I earned," Brad snarled, his mask slipping. "I dealt with your lectures for 10 years. I dealt with your arrogance. I built that fund. I brought in the investors. You stole from them," I said, softly, a spark of the real Reggie breaking through the act. "You stole from the church. You stole from Mrs. Higgins." Brad's face turned a violent shade of red. He grabbed the lapels of my jacket and shook me. "Who cares about them?" he shouted. "They are sheep. They exist to be sheared. And you are the shepherd who led them to the slaughterhouse. Now sign the damn paper or I will leave you here to rot and you will not get a single dime." I looked at Keisha. She was checking her watch. "Hurry up, Dad," she said. "I have a flight to catch in the morning." That was the final blow, the final confirmation. There was no hesitation in her, no remorse. She was bored. She was annoyed that her father's destruction was taking too long. I reached out a trembling hand and took the pen. It felt heavy like lead. "If I sign," I said, looking at the camera hidden in the mirror, "if I sign, you promise not to hurt Maya." Brad scoffed. "The kid is a nuisance, but she is family. As long as she keeps her mouth shut, she will be fine. Sign." I lowered the pen to the paper. I let the tip hover over the signature line. I could feel their anticipation. It was a palpable energy in the room, a hunger. They were so close to the finish line. They could almost taste the money. I started to write. I wrote the first letter of my name, then I stopped. The pen lifted from the paper. I sat up straighter. I pushed the blanket off my leg. I rolled my shoulders back, the slump disappearing from my spine. The transformation was subtle at first, then rapid. The confusion vanished from my eyes, replaced by a gaze of cold, hard steel. "What is the matter?" Brad asked, confused by the sudden change in my posture. "Is your hand cramping?" "No," I said. My voice was no longer a wheeze. It was the deep baritone rumble that had commanded boardrooms for decades. "My hand is steady." I dropped the pen on the table. It rolled across the document and fell to the floor. "I am just reading the fine print," I said. Brad stood up, sensing something was wrong. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the clause where you admit to fraud," I said calmly. "I am talking about the part where you confess to grand larceny." "You are talking nonsense," Keisha said, stepping forward. "Give me the pen. I will guide your hand." "Do not touch me," I snapped. The command cracked like a whip. Keisha froze. I looked at Brad. $5,000 a month, I said. "That is a generous offer, Brad, but I think I will counter." "Counter?" Brad laughed nervously. "You have nothing to bargain with." I stood up. I did not use the armrest. I stood up under my own power, towering over him. I picked up the glass of water and drank it, my hand perfectly steady. "I have everything," I said. I pointed to the mirror. I pointed to the book. I pointed to the flowers. "Smile, Brad," I said. "You are on camera." Brad spun around, looking at the mirror. He looked back at me, his face draining of color. "What I have been recording since you walked in," I said. "I have you on tape admitting to the theft. I have you admitting to the fraud. I have Keisha admitting she forged my signature on the mortgage deed, and I have you threatening me." Brad lunged for the flowers, tearing them apart, finding the small black lens. He crushed it in his hand, but it was too late. "It streams to the cloud, Brad," I said. "It is already gone. Marcus has it. The police have it." Keisha let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "Dad, what have you done?" "I have done what a father has to do when his children become wolves," I said. "I have put you down." Brad pulled a gun from his waistband. It was a small silver pistol. He pointed it at my chest. His hand was shaking violently. "You give me the password to delete it," he screamed. "Delete it now." I looked at the gun. I looked at him. I did not flinch. "You do not have the guts, Brad," I said. "You are a thief. You are a coward. You poison people. You push them off cliffs. You do not look them in the eye and pull the trigger." I took a step toward him. "Shoot me," I challenged. "End it. But know that the moment my heart stops, an email goes out to every investor in your fund with the real accounting books attached." Brad lowered the gun slightly. He was sweating. He looked at Keisha. She was backed into the corner, her hands over her mouth. "We can fix this," Brad stammered. "We can cut a deal." "There are no deals," I said. said. The dinner is over, and you are going to pay the bill. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder with every second. I had timed it perfect. Marcus had called them the moment Brad admitted to the allowance. They are coming for you, I said. I walked past him, bumping his shoulder. I walked to the door. I opened it and took a deep breath of the cold night air. Behind me, the sound of my family collapsing was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I walked out onto the porch to wait for the police, leaving the monsters in the dark where they belonged. The negotiation was finished. The metal barrel of the pistol trembled in Brad's grip, a silver eye staring unblinkingly at my chest. The air in the room was brittle, charged with a violence that threatened to snap at any second. My earlier defiance had shaken him, but desperation is a powerful fuel, and I could see the madness dancing behind his eyes. He was cornered, and a cornered rat will bite even a lion. I realized then that while I had the moral victory and the evidence I needed to ensure their destruction was total, I needed to ensure that when they fell into a pit so deep they would never see the sun again. The recording was not enough. I needed to give them exactly what they wanted, but in a form that would poison. I lowered my gaze from the gun to the papers scattered on the desk. They were the keys to the kingdom, the transfer documents that would hand over the King Group my liquid assets and the control of a $500 million empire to the man who had murdered my wife. Fine, I said, my voice dropping to a defeated whisper. You win, Brad. Put the gun away. I will sign. Brad did not lower the weapon immediately. He blinked, sweat stinging his eyes, suspicious of my sudden capitulation. You are lying, he hissed. You are plotting something. I am tired, Brad, I said, allowing my shoulders to slump, letting the years of grief and exhaustion wash over my features. I am an old man in a cold house. I just want to sleep. If $5,000 a month is the price of peace, then I will pay it. Just let me be. Keisha stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with renewed avarice. Give him the pen, Brad, she urged. Let him finish it. Brad slowly lowered the gun, though he kept his finger near the trigger. He kicked the pen across the floor toward me. Sign it, he commanded, and do not try any tricks. I bent down to retrieve the pen. My joints cracked a sound that seemed loud in the silence. I sat back in the leather chair and arranged the documents in front of me. I looked at the signature line. It was a simple black line, yet it represented the end of my life's work. I shifted the pen to my left hand. What are you doing? Brad barked. You are right-handed. My right arm, I lied, rubbing my shoulder. It is numb. The stress. I cannot grip the pen properly. It must be the stroke you mentioned. Brad sneered. Just get it done. I do not care if you sign it with your toes as long as it is legible. I touched the nib to the paper. Decades ago, when I first amassed my fortune, my banker and I had established a protocol. We called it the Red Hand. It was a fail-safe designed for this exact scenario, for the nightmare of kidnapping or extortion. I had registered a secondary signature, one executed with my non-dominant hand. To the untrained eye, it looked like the shaky, deteriorated scrawl of an elderly man suffering from medical decline. It would pass any visual inspection by a greedy relative or a corrupt notary. But to the optical character recognition software of the King Group's central bank, it was a scream for help. It was a silent alarm that would deafen the financial world. I began to write. The pen scratched against the paper, an ugly, jagged sound. I formed the letters of my name, slowly, deliberately distorting the loops and angles. I felt a strange sense of power flowing through my left arm. I was not signing away my fortune. I was signing their death warrant. With every stroke of the pen, I was activating a digital fortress. I knew exactly what was happening in the server rooms hundreds of miles away as the ink dried. The moment this document was scanned and transmitted, the algorithm would detect the variance in pressure and angle. It would flag the left-handed orientation, and it would execute the lockdown. I finished the signature with a flourish that trailed off the line, mimicking exhaustion. I pushed the papers across the desk. It is done, I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. Take it and go. Brad snatched the papers up as if they were holy scripture. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking with excitement. He opened the banking app, the one he had forced me to install, and used the camera to scan the document. Uploading now, he muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. I watched him. I waited for the notification. I knew the system. It would accept the document initially. It would give him the green light he craved, the dopamine hit of perceived success. The lockdown would happen in the background, silent and invisible, sealing the exits before the thief even knew he was in the vault. Processing. Brad read aloud. Verification complete. Transfer initiated. He looked up at me, a grin splitting his face that was terrifying in its sheer, unadulterated greed. We did it, Keisha, he shouted, grabbing my daughter and spinning her around. We own it all. The trust, the accounts, the real estate. It is all ours. $500 million. Keisha laughed, a sound of pure relief and malice. calloused. She looked at me not with gratitude, but with the dismissal one gives to a discarded wrapper. "You should have done this years ago, Dad," she said. "You could have saved us all a lot of trouble." Brad looked at his phone again. "Look at the balance," he crowed. "Look at those zeros. I am going to buy the island. I am going to buy the jet." He waved the papers in the air, the physical symbol of his victory. "You are a smart man," Reggie. Brad said, his arrogance returning tenfold. "You finally realized when you were beaten. Do not worry about your allowance. We will send a check. Eventually." He grabbed Keisha's hand. "Let's go. I want to open a bottle of the good champagne, the really good stuff." They turned their backs on. They walked toward the door, their steps light and bouncy, floating on a cloud of stolen wealth. They did not see the red light blinking on the silent alarm sensor in the corner. They did not know that the transfer they had initiated was not moving money into their accounts, but moving it into a federal holding pattern. They did not know that their own accounts, the ones they had linked to, received the funds, were currently being frozen, their assets seized, their passports flagged. They thought they were walking out of there as kings. They were walking out as prisoners who just hadn't heard the cell door slam yet. Brad paused at the doorway and looked back at me one last time. I was still sitting in the chair, the blanket over my legs, looking small and defeated. "Goodbye, old man," he said. "Try not to die before the first check clears. It would be a paperwork headache." He laughed at his own cruelty and walked out into the night. I listened to the sound of their car starting. I listened to the gravel crunching as they sped away, racing toward a future that no longer existed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own phone. I opened the secure banking app. The screen was a wall of red warning. "System lockdown active. Duress signal received. Authorities notified. All assets frozen." I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. They had the paper. They had the signature. They had the promise of $500 million. But in reality, they did not even have enough money to pay for the gas in their tank. I stood up and walked to the window, watching their taillights fade into the darkness. "Enjoy the ride, Brad," I whispered. "It is going to be a very short trip." The police sirens I had mentioned earlier were not a bluff, but Marcus had timed them to intercept the vehicle on the main road away from the house to ensure the arrest was public and undeniable. But the financial cage I had just built around them was far stronger than any prison bars. I picked up the silver-framed photo of Betty from the desk. "Got them, Betty," I said softly. "They took the bait. They took the hook. And now the line is snapping tight." I turned away from the window and walked toward the back of the house where Vance was waiting. The act was over. The frail old man was gone. Reggie Sterling was back, and he had a war to finish. The champagne bubbles rose in the crystal flutes, golden and effervescent, mimicking the mood of the man standing at the center of the room. It was 24 hours after the signing, 24 hours after Bradley Sterling believed he had conquered the world. The headquarters of Sterling Global, occupying the top 3 floors of the city's most expensive skyscraper, had been transformed into a gala of self-congratulation. Waiters in white jackets moved silently through the crowd of investors, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a week. The air smelled of expensive perfume, imported lilies, and the distinct metallic scent of greed. Brad stood on a raised platform at the front of the room, basking in the adoration of the crowd. He wore a tuxedo that had been tailored in London, the fabric shimmering under the recessed lighting. Beside him stood Keisha, draped in a gown of crimson silk, diamonds glittering at her throat like stars in a bloody sky. They looked like royalty. They looked like the future. They looked like people who had gotten away with murder. The room was packed. It was a sea of faces, a mix of the city's financial elite and the community leaders Brad had so carefully groomed and deceived. I saw Deacon Jones near the back, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best, holding a glass of sparkling water. I saw Mrs. Higgins wearing her church hat, her eyes wide with the spectacle of it all. They were there because Brad had promised them an announcement that would change their lives. He was right, of course, but not in the way they expected. Brad raised his hands and the room fell silent. The murmur of conversation died away, replaced by an expectant hush. He smiled that practiced, shark-like smile that had charmed millions out of the pockets of honest people, friends, partners, visionaries. Brad began, his voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you for coming tonight. We stand at the precipice of a new era. For years, Sterling Global has been a beacon of growth and stability in a volatile market, but tonight we take the next step. Tonight, we ascend." He paused for effect, letting his gaze sweep over the room. He locked eyes with the major investors in the front row, the men and women whose money he had already spent in his mind. "I am proud to announce that as of last night, Sterling Global has successfully acquired the full asset portfolio of the King Group. This merger brings $500 million in liquid capital and real estate under our management. This ensures not just the stability of your current investments, but guarantees returns that will make history." A ripple of applause started polite at first, then growing in volume as the magnitude of the numbers sank in. $500 million. It was enough to cover the holes in the Ponzi scheme. It was enough to bury the lies for another decade. Keisha clapped the loudest, her eyes shining with triumph. She leaned over and whispered something in Brad's ear, and he laughed, a sound of pure, pure, unadulterated victory. To illustrate the future, Brad said, gesturing grandly to the massive LED screen behind him that spanned the entire wall. I have prepared a presentation that outlines our strategy for the next quarter. Look closely, friends. You are looking at the architecture of your wealth. He pressed a button on a small remote control. The lights in the room dimmed further. The screen flickered to life, but it was not a graph. It was not a chart showing upward trend. It was not the sleek corporate logo of Sterling Global. The image was grainy, shot from a hidden angle in a dimly lit room. It showed a man sitting in a high-backed leather chair, his face twisted in a sneer of contempt. It was Brad. The audio crackled through the speakers, loud and distorted, cutting through the silence of the ballroom like a chainsaw. Who cares about them? The voice of Brad boomed, echoing off the glass walls. They are sheep. They exist to be sheared, and you are the shepherd who led them to the slaughterhouse. The applause died instantly. The silence that followed was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a car crash the moment after impact, when the world holds its breath. On the screen, the Brad in the video leaned forward, grabbing the lapels of an old man's jacket. The camera angle shifted, revealing the profile of Reggie King looking frail and terrified. Now sign the damn paper or I will leave you here to rot, and you will not get a single dime. The video, Brad screamed. In the ballroom, the real Brad froze. His hand was still raised, pointing at the screen, but his smile had vanished, replaced by a look of absolute primal terror. He pressed the button on the remote frantically. Click, click, click. Nothing happened. The video continued to play. Keisha gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She took a step back, tripping on the hem of her gown. On the screen, the scene shifted. It showed Keisha standing in the corner of the room, her arms crossed, her face cold. Just sign it, Dad, the video, Keisha said, her voice amplified to a deafening volume. Stop making this difficult for us. You are sick. You do not know what is happening. We are trying to help you, and you are just dragging this out. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Mrs. Higgins dropped her glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp and violent. Brad was panic-stricken. He ran to the side of the stage, shouting at the technicians in the sound booth. Turn it off, he screamed, his voice cracking. Cut the power. Cut the feed. The technicians were frantically typing on their consoles, their faces pale. One of them looked up at Brad and shook his head, holding up his hands in a gesture of helplessness. We are locked out, sir, the technician yelled back. The system is not responding. It is a remote override. The video continued, relentless and damning. It showed Brad pulling the gun. It showed the silver barrel pointed at Reggie's chest. You give me the password to delete it, the video, Brad shrieked. Delete it now. The crowd in the ballroom began to move. It was a wave of panic and revulsion. People were backing away from the stage as if Brad were radioactive. The investors who had been shaking his hand minutes ago were now looking at him with horror. Deacon Jones stepped forward, his face a mask of betrayal. You stole it, he shouted, his voice booming over the chaos. You stole the money. It was all a lie. Brad turned back to the crowd, his hands raised in a pathetic attempt to calm them. Please listen, he stammered, sweat pouring down his face. This is a fabrication. It is a deep fake. It is AI. My father-in-law is sick. He is trying to sabotage me. But the screen did not lie. It showed the moment of truth. It showed Reggie standing up, the frailty vanishing from his body. It showed the old man towering over the coward. I have you on tape admitting to the theft. The video, Reggie said, his voice calm and powerful. I have you admitting to the fraud. I have Keisha admitting she forged my signature on the mortgage deeds. The word forged hung in the air. The bankers in the room, the men who understood the legal implications, immediately pulled out their phone. They were calling their compliance department. They were freezing assets. They were distancing themselves from the sinking ship. Keisha ran to Brad, grabbing his arm. Do something, she hissed, her eyes wild. Make it stop. I cannot, Brad yelled at her, pushing her away. The video reached its climax. It showed Brad scanning the document with his phone. It showed his greed. It showed his gloating. We did it, Keisha, the video, Brad shouted. We own it all. The trust, the accounts, the real estate. It is all ours. $500 million. Then the screen went black for a second. Text appeared in stark white letters against the darkness. Sterling Global is insolvent. All assets are frozen. The police have been notified. The ballroom erupted. It was pandemonium. Investors were shouting, demanding answers. Some were crying. Mrs. Higgins had collapsed into a chair, being fanned by a waiter. Brad stood alone on the stage, the remote control slipping from his sweaty fingers and clattering to the floor. He looked at the screen, then at the crowd, then at the exits. He realized with a dawning horror that there was nowhere to run. The doors were blocked by the very people he had swindled. He looked for Keisha, but she was already backing away, retreating into the shadows, trying to separate herself from him, trying to become invisible. But the spotlight was wide, and it burned them both. High above the chaos in the ventilation system, or perhaps in the server room, the unseen hand of Reggie King kept the video looping. He made them watch it again. He made them watch the gun. He made them watch the confession. He rubbed their noses in their own filth. Brad fell to his knees, his expensive tuxedo straining at the seam. He covered his ears, trying to block out the sound of his own voice condemning him, but the the speakers were merciless. The party was over, the champagne was warm, and the hangover was going to be lethal. This was not just a business failure. This was a public execution of a reputation broadcast live to the people who mattered most. And standing in the wreckage of his life, Brad finally understood what Reggie meant when he said he would pay the bill. The cost was everything. The chaos in the ballroom was a physical force, a swirling vortex of shouting voices, shattered glass, and panic that smelled of expensive cologne, fear. The giant LED screen behind the stage had gone black, finally cutting off the loop Brad's confession, but the damage absolute. The image of the gun, the sound of the threats, and the revelation of the fraud hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Brad stood at the edge of the stage, his hands trembling, his eyes darting frantically from face to face, looking for an ally, for a way out, for a miracle that would reverse time. But miracles were in short supply for traders tonight. Justice, however, was arriving in a fleet of black SUVs. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open, they were thrown wide with a thunderous boom that cut through the noise of the crowd like a gavel striking a sounding block. The sound was authoritative, final, and it commanded silence. The shouting died down, heads turned, the sea of investors, victims, and socialites parted instinctively, creating a wide aisle down the center of the room. I stepped through the threshold. I was not the frail, blanket-wrapped invalid Brad had bullied in the villa hours ago. I was not the confused old man trembling over a glass of water. I was Reggie King. I wore a bespoke suit of midnight black wool that fit my frame like armor. My shirt was crisp white, my tie a deep crimson silk. I walked with my cane, but I did not lean on it. I held it by the silver lion's head handle, swinging it rhythmically, with each step a scepter of my returned power. Flanking me were the instruments of the law. To my right walked Sheriff Miller, a man I had known for 20 years, his face set in a grim line of duty. To my left were 4 agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, their badges catching the light, their hands resting near their weapons. Behind us, Vance and his team secured the perimeter, ensuring no rat could scurry into the shadows. I walked down the center aisle. The sound of my dress shoes clicking against the marble floor echoed in the silence. I looked into the faces of the people I had known for decades. I saw Mrs. Higgins clutching her chest, tears streaming down her face as she realized I was alive. I saw Deacon Jones, his mouth open in shock, his eyes wide with a dawning hope. I nodded to them, a small, subtle gesture that said, "I am here. It is over." Brad watched me approach, his face drained of all color, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under the heat of the spotlight. He stumbled back, his legs hitting the podium. He gripped it for support, his knuckles white. He looked from me to the screen, then back to me, his mind unable to reconcile the dying man he had left in the cold villa with the Titan walking toward him now. I reached the foot of the stairs leading to the stage. I stopped. I looked up at him. The distance between us was only a few feet, but morally we were universes apart. "Brad," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and resonant. It did not need a microphone to reach the back of the room. It carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. Brad's mouth opened and closed. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You," he stammered, his voice a breathless rasp. You signed the papers." He clung to that fact like a drowning man clutching a stone. In his twisted mind, the signature was magic. It was the binding spell that made him the king, regardless of the video, regardless of the police. He believed in the power of the contract more than he believed in the reality of his crime. I smiled. It was a cold smile, devoid of mirth. I slowly climbed the stairs. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. I stood next to him on the platform. I was taller than him. I was stronger than him. I was everything he pretended to be, but could never become. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the terror on him. "I signed the death warrant for your career, son," I said softly, the words slicing through the air. I turned to the crowd, raising my voice so every soul in the room could hear the verdict. "The document you hold, Brad, was signed with my left hand. It is a distress signal. It is a protocol I established with the central bank 30 years ago for this exact scenario. The moment you scanned it, you did not authorize a transfer. You authorized a global freeze of every asset connected to the King Group and Sterling Global." Brad looked at his phone, pulling it from his pocket with frantic desperation. He stared at the screen. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He dropped the phone. It clattered on the stage. "You broke it," he whispered, looking at me with the eyes of a child who has just watched his favorite toy shatter. "You broke the deal." "There was no deal," I said. "There was only bait, and you swallowed it whole." I nodded to the sheriff. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratchet clicking open was loud and sharp. Bradley Sterling, the sheriff, announced, his voice booming, "You are under arrest." Brad tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The FBI agents had moved onto the stage, cutting off his escape. On what grounds? Brad shrieked, his composure shattering completely. "This is a corporate dispute. I have rights. You are under arrest for securities fraud," the sheriff listed, grabbing Brad's wrist and twisting it behind his back, "for money laundering, for grand larceny, for the attempted murder of Reggie King." The crowd gasped at the last charge. Attempted murder. It was one thing to steal money. It was another another to kill the man who had given you everything. And the sheriff continued snapping the first cuff onto Brad's wrist for the first-degree murder of Betty King. The room went dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Brad froze. He stopped struggling. He looked at me, his eyes bulged. "We know about the Digoxin, Brad," I said, my voice trembling with a suppressed rage that threatened to consume me. "We know about Dr. Evan. We know you signed the waiver. We know you used my wife as a test subject." "No," Brad whimpered. That was necessary." The sheriff slammed him against the podium, snapping the second cuff on. "You have the right to remain silent," the sheriff growled. "And I strongly suggest you use it, because if you say one more word to this man, I will not be able to stop him from killing you myself." They hauled him up. Brad looked pathetic, his tuxedo bunched up, his hair wild, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the coward beneath. He looked out at the crowd, searching for sympathy, searching for Keisha. "Keisha," he screamed. "Keisha, tell them we did it together." I looked toward the shadows at the edge of the stage. 2 FBI agents emerged, leading my daughter out into the light. She was already in handcuffs. She did not look at Brad. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at me. Her face was a mask of shock, her makeup streaked with tears. She looked small. She looked like the little girl who used to ask me to check under her bed for monsters, only to grow up and become one herself. I held her gaze for a long moment. I felt a pang of agony in my chest, the ancient pain of a father watching his child fall, but I pushed it down. I could not save her. She had signed her own name to the devil's ledger. "Take them away." The agents marched them out. The crowd parted again, but this time there was no respect in their movement. There was only revulsion. People jeered. Some spat on the floor as Brad passed. Mrs. Higgins stood up and shouted, "Shame on you," and her voice carried the weight of the entire community. When the doors closed behind them, swallowing the noise of their protest, the room felt lighter. The poison had been drawn out. I stood alone on the stage. I looked out at the faces of the people I had let down by bringing a wolf into the fold. I adjusted my cuff. I gripped my cane. I walked to the microphone. I tapped it once. The sound echoed through the room. "My friends," I said. My voice was tired, but it was steady. "I owe you an apology. I trusted a man who did not deserve it. And because of my trust, your security was threatened." I looked at Deacon Jones. I looked at Mrs. Higgins. "But hear me now," I continued. "The nightmare is over. The assets of the King Group are secure. The money that was stolen from you has been tracked. It has been frozen." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was not a legal document. It was a personal check drawn from my private reserves, the emergency funds that Brad had never found. "I am personally guaranteeing every cent invested in Sterling Global," I announced. "No one in this room will lose their home. No one will lose their retirement. If the courts take too long to return your money, I will pay you from my own pocket starting tomorrow morning." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, followed by a singular clap, then another, until the ballroom was thundering with applause. It was not the polite applause of a gala. It was the applause of salvation. I raised a hand to quiet them. "Go home to your families," I said. "Kiss your children. Hug your spouses. The money is safe. But let this be a lesson to us all. Trust is precious, and wolves often wear the finest wool." I stepped back from the microphone. I did not stay for the handshake. I did not stay for the praise. I felt a deep, crushing exhaustion settling into my bones. I had won the war. I had destroyed my enemy. I had saved my reputation. But as I walked off the stage and toward the exit where Vance was waiting with Maya, I knew the cost. I had lost my wife all over again. I had lost my daughter. I had lost the illusion of the happy ending I thought I had earned. Maya ran to me as I entered the hallway. She hugged me tight, burying her face in my coat. "Is it over, Grandpa?" she asked. "Yes, sweet girl," I said, stroking her hair. "It is over." I looked back at the empty stage one last time. The king had returned to his throne, but the castle was empty, and the crown was heavier than it had ever been before. "Let's go," I said to Vance. "Take us to the train station. We have a long journey ahead of us." We walked out into the night, leaving the wreckage of my family behind, moving forward into a future that was uncertain, but finally undeniably clean. The heavy oak doors swung shut, swallowing the screams of Bradley Sterling, and sealing the fate of the man who had thought he could steal the sun. The silence that rushed back into the ballroom was sudden and violent, a physical weight that pressed down on the hundreds of witnesses standing frozen in their evening wear. The air was thick with the residue of justice, but the final act was not yet written. There was one player left on the stage, one loose thread that needed to be cut before the tapestry of my life could be mended. I turned my gaze slowly, deliberately, to the edge of the platform. Keisha stood there framed by the shadows, looking like a statue carved from ice and terror. Her crimson dress, which had seemed so regal only an hour ago, now looked like an open wound against the stark white of the stage light. The diamonds at her throat no longer sparkled. They looked like a noose, tight and cold. She was alone. For the first time in years, she did not have Brad to hide behind. She did not have his arrogance to shield her or his schemes to distract her. There was just her, and there was me, and the ocean of truth that lay between us. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the calculation flickering there. It was a desperate, frantic thing, the survival instinct of a creature trapped in a corner. She looked at the FBI agents blocking the exit. exit. She looked at the crowd whose faces had turned from admiration to judgment, and then she made her move. She did not run, she did not fight. She did what she had done for her entire life when she wanted something from her father. She performed. Daddy. She wailed a high, thin sound that grated against my nerve. She ran across the stage, her heels clicking frantically on the floorboards. She threw herself at my feet, collapsing in a heap of red silk. Her hands clawed at my legs, gripping the fabric of my trousers as if I were the only solid thing left in her dissolving universe. Daddy, please, you have to listen to me, she sobbed, burying her face against my knee. Tears hot and wet soaked through the wool. It was Brad. It was all him. He made me do it. I was scared. He threatened me. I looked down at the top of her head. I saw the trembling of her shoulders. I heard the desperation in her voice. A part of me, the old part, the part that remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle and holding her hand on the first day of school, wanted to reach down. That part wanted to stroke her hair and tell her it would be all right, that I would fix it, that I would make the bad men go away. But that part of me was dead. It had died in a hospital bed with a syringe underneath it. It had died in a safe house watching a video of a woman drinking wine and wishing for my death. I stood rigid, a stone pillar against her tide of lies. I did not touch her. I did not pull away. I simply existed in the space she was trying to invade. He controlled everything, Keisha cried, her voice muffled against my leg. He told me he would hurt me if I didn't help him. I didn't know about the poison. I didn't know about Mom. You have to believe me. I am your daughter. I am your baby girl. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Some people were shifting uncomfortably. A few looked sympathetic. It was a compelling performance. The victimized wife, the controlled daughter. It was the narrative she was betting her life on. I signaled to the technician in the booth at the back of the room. It was a small motion, a simple nod, but it carried the weight of an executioner's act. The giant LED screen behind us flickered to life once more. The image was crisp and clear. It was the kitchen island again. It was the bottle of wine. It was Keisha wearing her silk robe holding a pen. The audio boomed through the speakers, drowning out her sob. Then we do it without him, the voice of Brad said on the recording. I looked down at Keisha. She had frozen. Her grip on my legs slackened. She knew what was coming. She knew there was no hiding from this. On the screen, the Keisha of 3 weeks ago did not look scared. She did not look threatened. She looked bored. She looked annoyed. She picked up the pen and began to sign. I cannot ask him to sign this, the video, Keisha said. He is old, but he is not senile. In the ballroom, the real Keisha slowly lifted her head. Her face was streaked with mascara, a grotesque mask of tragedy. She looked at the screen, staring at her own reflection, staring at the evidence of her agency. The video continued. It showed the forgery. It showed the practiced ease with which she stole my name. But that was just the preamble. That was just the theft. The murder came next. I watched as the video Keisha took a sip of wine and looked directly at her husband. He has had his time, Brad, the recorded voice said, dripping with icy venom. He had his empire. He had his glory. Now it is our turn. Why should we wait until he dies of old age to enjoy what is rightfully ours? The crowd gasped. The sympathy evaporated from the room like mist in a gale. This was not a woman acting under duress. This was a woman stating her manifesto. No, the real Keisha whispered, shaking her head. No, that is out of context. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers. I wanted her to see my eye. I wanted her to see the void where her father used to be. Context, I repeated softly. You want context, Keisha. Let us play the rest. The video played on. It reached the moment that had shattered my soul in the safe house. The old man has lived too long, the voice on the screen said. Mom should have taken him with her when she went. It would have been a mercy for everyone. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. They were a desecration of her mother's memory. They were a death wish spoken aloud. Keisha released my leg and scrambled backward, crab walking across the stage to get away from me, to get away from the screen, to get away from the truth. She looked at the audience, begging with her eyes for someone, anyone, to believe her lie. But there was no one. The investors looked at her with revulsion. Mrs. Higgins turned her back. Deacon Jones shook his head, a tear tracking through the wrinkles of his face. I straightened up, adjusting my cuff. I tapped the cane on the floor. The sound was a final punctuation. You were not manipulated. Keisha, I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room without effort. You were not a victim. You were the architect. You forged the deed. You authorized the transfers. You looked at your husband and you told him to hurry up and bury me. I did it for us, she screamed, her facade cracking completely, revealing the ugly, jagged entitlement beneath. I did it because you wouldn't let go. You held on to the money like it was the only thing that mattered. You judged Brad. You judged me. You made us feel small. I made you feel small because you refused to grow, I countered. I gave you everything. I gave you an education. I gave you a home. I gave you a trust fund that most people would kill for. It wasn't enough, she shrieked, standing up now, her hands balled into fists. It was never enough. You always looked at me like I was a disappointment. I looked at you like you were my daughter, I said, sadness finally bleeding into my voice. I looked at you with hope. I thought if I gave you enough you would find your way. I took a step toward her. She flinched. Keisha, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a thunderstorm. I taught you how to walk when your legs were too weak to hold you. I taught you how to speak when you had no word. I taught you how to survive in a world that is hard and unforgiving. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. But I forgot the most important lesson I said. I forgot to teach you how to be human. I forgot to teach you that loyalty is worth more than gold. I forgot to teach you that you do not bite the hand that feeds you, and you certainly do not poison the heart that loves you. I gestured to the room, to the city beyond the windows, to the empire I had built from dust. My assets, my money, my legacy. I said, my voice hardening into iron. They will never belong to the person who wanted to kill me. They will never belong to a woman who invoked her mother's death as a convenience. You are not my heir, Keisha. You are my greatest failure. Keisha stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, words failing her for the first time. The reality of her position crashed down on her. The money was gone. The status was gone. The father was gone. I nodded to the FBI agents waiting in the wing. Take her, I said. The agents moved in. They did not handle her gently. They pulled her arms behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was louder than her screams had been. No, Daddy, no, she pleaded, reverting to the child again, but the spell was broken. You can't let them take me. Prison will kill me. You should have thought of that before you tried to kill me, I said, turning my back on her. I heard her struggling. I heard her shoes scraping against the floor as they dragged her away. I heard her screaming my name until the heavy doors slammed shut again, cutting off the noise, cutting off the toxicity, cutting off the branch of the family tree that had rotted from the inside out. I stood alone on the stage for a long time. The screen behind me went black. The room was silent save for the soft weeping of a few people in the crowd who understood that they had just witnessed a tragedy, not a triumph. I felt old. I felt tired. I felt a hollowness in my chest where my heart used to be. I had won the war. I had saved my fortune. I had protected my name. But I had lost the only family I had left, save for one small, brave girl waiting in the car. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the people who still looked to me for strength. I straightened my back. I gripped my cane. I had a duty to them. I had a duty to Maya. And I had a duty to the memory of the woman I had loved, the woman who would have been heartbroken to see this day, but who would have stood by my side and told me I did the right thing. Justice is a cold meal, I thought as I walked down the stairs, but it is the only thing that will keep us from starving. The silence that descended upon the King Group Tower in the weeks following the arrests was not the silence of the grave, but the silence of a construction site before the first hammer swing. It was the quiet of rebuilding. The rot had been excised, the cancer cut out with a scalpel of public humiliation and legal force, but the patient, my empire, was still in recovery. I sat in my office, the city skyline sprawling beneath me through the floor-to-ceiling glass. The view was the same as it had always been, a tapestry of lights and ambition, but I looked at it with new eyes. I was no longer just a CEO. I was a survivor. Across the desk from me sat Marcus, my attorney, and a team of forensic accountants who had spent the last fortnight digging through the digital ruins of Brad's life. They looked exhausted, their ties loosened coffee cups forming a barricade around their laptop. We found it all, Reggie Marcus said, sliding a thick binder across the mahogany surface. Brad was arrogant. He thought he would never be audited. He moved the money through shell companies in the Caymans and Belize, but he left digital fingerprints everywhere. He used his personal email for wire transfers. He paid for his mistresses and his gambling debts directly from the fund's operating capital. I opened the binder. It was a roadmap of greed. Millions of dollars siphoned away from honest, hardworking people used to buy sports cars, watches, and the illusion of success. Recover it. I ordered, my voice flat. Every single penny. I want the houses seized. I want the jewelry auctioned. I want the cars repossessed. If he bought a stick of gum with stolen money, I want it back. It will take time, Marcus warned. The international courts move slowly. I do not care about the time, I said. I care about the principle. But there were people who could not wait for the international courts. There were people whose lives were bleeding out right now. I stood up and walked to the window. I thought of Mrs. Higgins. I thought of Deacon Jones. I thought of the faces in the ballroom twisted in fear when the truth came out. Marcus, I said, turning back to him. Draft the check. Marcus blinked. Which checks? To the investors, I said. The church group, the community members, everyone who invested less than $500,000. I want them paid in full. Today, Reggie Marcus sighed, taking off his glasses. You are not legally liable for Brad's fraud. Sterling Global was a separate entity. If you pay them now out of your personal accounts, you might never see that money again, even when we liquidate Brad's assets. It is a loss of nearly $20 million. I looked at the portrait of my wife hanging on the wall. Betty would not have cared about the $20 million. She would have cared about Mrs. Higgins being able to afford her heating bill. My name was on the brochure, Marcus, I said softly. They trusted Brad because they trusted me. My reputation is worth more than $20 million. It is the only thing I have left to take with me when I go. Cut the checks. 2 hours later, I sat in the conference room. I had summoned the small investors, the victims from my neighborhood. They filed filed in looking terrified, expecting bad news, expecting lawyers to tell them to get in line for a bankruptcy hearing that would yield pennies on the dollar. Mrs. Higgins walked in, leaning heavily on her walker. She refused to look me in the eye. She was ashamed not of herself, but for me. She felt the shame of my family's betrayal as if it were her own. "Please, sit down," I said. I did not make a speech. I did not offer platitude. I simply walked around the table and handed each of them an envelope. Mrs. Higgins opened hers. Her hands shook. She pulled out the check. She stared at the number. It was her original investment plus 5% interest. "Reggie," she whispered, her voice trembling. This is too much. You didn't do this." I sat down at the head of the table. "I let a wolf into the sheepfold, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "It was my job to guard the gate. I failed. This is not charity. This is a debt paid." The room broke into tears. It was not the polite weeping of the courtroom. It was the guttural, heaving relief of people who had been staring into the abyss of poverty and had been pulled back at the last second. They came to me one by one, shaking my hand, hugging me. I felt the weight of their gratitude, and for the first time since the hospital, the cold stone in my chest began to warm. I had lost my biological family, but I had saved my community. That was a legacy I could live with. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned with the update I had been dreading yet craving. "The medical board ruling came down an hour ago," he said, standing in the doorway of my office, and I asked, not looking up from my paperwork. "Dr. Evans has been stripped of his medical license permanently," Marcus said. "The state prosecutor has also filed charges. First-degree murder, conspiracy, and fraud. They are seeking life without parole. He is currently in solitary confinement for his own protection. Apparently, the other inmates do not look kindly on doctors who kill grandmothers for profit." I nodded slowly. It was not enough to bring Betty back. Nothing would ever bring her back. But knowing that the man who stopped her heart would never see the sun again, that he would die in a concrete box just like he deserved, brought a grim sense of closure. "Good," I said. "Ensure the prosecutor has everything. If he needs to exhume her body again, if he needs more files, give him everything. I want Evans buried under the weight of his own sin." The sun began to set, painting the office in hues of orange and purple. The business of the day was done. The empire was safe. The enemies were vanquished. But there was one more meeting I had to take. I left the office and had my driver take me to my new residence. I could not go back to the old house. It was too full of ghosts. I had bought a brownstone in the historic district, a place with high ceilings and strong bones, a place for a new start. Maya was waiting for me in the library. Since the night of the arrest, she had been quiet. The trauma of the hospital, the betrayal of her father, the sight of her mother being handcuffed, it had all taken a toll. She was a child who had been forced to grow up in a single night. She sat in a large armchair reading a book, looking small and fragile. I walked in and sat opposite her. "Maya," I said gently, "we need to talk about the future." She closed the book. She looked at me with eyes that were too old for her face. "Am I going to boarding school?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "You are staying here with me. I have legal custody now. Your parents are going away for a very long time." She nodded. She did not cry. She had run out of tears. "I want to ask you something, Grandpa," she said. "Do you hate them?" I thought about the question. I thought about the rage that had consumed me. "I hate what they did," I said. "I hate that they chose greed over love. But hate is a poison, Maya. If you hold on to it, it kills you. I am trying to let it go." She looked down at her hand. "Dad said we were going to be rich," she whispered. "He said I could have anything I want." "And what do you want, Maya?" I asked. "I just want to be safe," she said. "I don't care about the money. I hate the money. It made them monsters." I stood up and walked over to her. I knelt down so I was at eye level. "Money is just a tool, Maya. It is like a hammer. You can use it to build a house, or you can use it to break someone's skull. It depends on the hand that holds it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key card. It was an employee access badge for the King Group. It had her name on it and her photo. "I am not going to give you an allowance, Maya," I said. "I am not going to buy you a pony or a sports car. I am not going to make the same mistake I made with your mother. I gave her everything and she valued nothing." She looked at the badge. "What is this?" "You start on Monday," I said. "You are going to work in the archives. You are going to scan documents. You are going to file paperwork. You are going to fetch coffee. You will be the lowest-ranking employee in the building. You will earn minimum wage. You will take the bus to work." She looked at me surprised. "You want me to work? I want you to learn," I said. "I want you to understand how hard it is to earn $1. I want you to respect the people who clean the floors and the people who answer the phone. I want you to build character, not a portfolio." I paused, gripping her shoulder. "One day all of this will be yours," said, gesturing to the house, to the city beyond. "But you will not inherit it because of your blood. You will inherit it because you earned. You will inherit it because you are worthy." Maya took the badge. She ran her thumb over her name. She looked at me and a small, genuine smile touched her lip. "Okay, Grandpa," she said. "I will do it." "Good," I said, standing up. "Now go get some sleep. You have a long day tomorrow. We are going to buy you some work clothes. No designer label, just practical shoes." She stood up and hugged. It was a tight, fierce hug. "I love you, Grandpa," she said. "I love you too, Maya," I replied, holding her close. She ran upstairs, her footsteps light on the stairs. I walked to the window and looked looked out at the street. The streetlights were flickering on. The world was turning. The nightmare was over. I was an old man, tired and scarred, but I was not broken. I had lost a family, but I had saved a soul. I touched the pocket where I kept Betty's photo. "We did it, Betty," I whispered to the night. "We saved the girl. We broke the cycle." And for the first time in a long time, as the city slept around me, I felt a profound, quiet peace settle over my heart. The reconstruction was finished. The foundation was strong. And the future, though uncertain, was finally in good hands. The morning mist clung to the manicured lawns of the cemetery, a soft white shroud that muffled the distant hum of the city. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a smell that felt clean and final. I walked the familiar path, the gravel crunching softly beneath my polished shoe. My cane tapped a steady rhythmic beat against the stones, not as a support for a weak body, but as a metronome for a mind that had finally found its quiet. I reached the plot where the grass was greenest, shaded by an ancient oak tree that had stood sentinel for 100 years. The marble headstone was simple and elegant, just like the woman who slept beneath it. Elizabeth King, beloved wife, the love of my life. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle over me. I did not cry. I had shed enough tears to fill an ocean, and salt water does nothing to nourish the dead. Instead, I reached into the deep pocket of my wool coat and pulled out a folded newspaper. The ink was still fresh, the paper crisp. I knelt down my joints, protesting slightly with the dampness, and placed the paper on the grass next to the bouquet of white lilies I had brought. The headline screamed in bold black letters: "Sterling Empire Collapses. Founder and wife indicted on murder and fraud charges." Beneath it was a picture of Brad looking disheveled and terrified as he was shoved into a police car, and a smaller inset photo of Keisha, her face hidden behind her hand. "You see this, Betty?" I whispered to the cold stone. "It is done." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above me, a sound like a soft sigh. I cleared the weeds from our garden. "My love," I continued, my voice steady but thick with emotion. "It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. You always loved that garden. You used to tell me that if you let the weeds stay because you felt sorry for them, they would eventually strangle the roses. You were right. I let them grow for too long. I mistook their clinging vines for an embrace. I mistook their presence for flowers, but they were parasites, Betty. They were choking the life out of everything we built." I traced the letters of her name with my gloved finger. It was painful, I admitted. It felt like cutting off my own arm. To see our daughter in chains, to see the hatred in her eyes, it broke what little remained of my heart. But it was necessary. She was not the girl we raised anymore. That girl died a long time ago, consumed by a hunger we could never satisfy. If I had let them stay, if I had let them win, they would have destroyed Maya. They would have destroyed your memory. They would have turned your legacy into a slush fund for their vices. I could not allow that. I laid down the law, Betty. I protected the house. I stood up slowly, brushing a speck of dirt from my knee. The sun was beginning to burn through the mist, casting long beams of light across the grave. "I am alone now in the big house," I said, "but I am not lonely." It was the truth. The silence in my new brownstone was not the heavy, oppressive silence of the last few years. It was a peaceful silence. It was the silence of safety. "I have Maya," I told her. "She reminds me so much of you. She has your stubbornness. She has your fire." Yesterday, she came home with paper cuts on her fingers and ink on her blouse, complaining about the filing system in the archives. She is working hard. She is learning the value of $1, the weight of responsibility. She is not waiting for a handout. She is building a character. We saved her, Betty. We pulled her out of the fire before she could be burned. I looked toward the gates of the cemetery. I knew that when I walked out, I would drive past the church. I knew Mrs. Higgins would be there arranging the flowers for the Sunday service. I knew she would wave at me not with pity, but with a profound nodding respect. I knew Deacon Jones would stop by later to talk about the community center repairs. "I have my name back," I said. "They tried to muddy it. They tried to drag it through the gutter. But mud washes off if the stone underneath is solid. The community knows the truth now. They know I did not abandon them. They look at me and they see a man who kept his word. They see a man who stood in the fire and did not burn." I adjusted my coat, buttoning it against the chill. The visit was over. The report was delivered. "Rest easy, my love," I said. "The storm has passed. The foundation holds." I turned away from the grave. I walked back down the path, my head held high. I did not look back. I never looked back. The past was a lesson, not a resident. As I reached the end of the path, I paused. I looked directly ahead, as if peering through the veil of reality, looking into the eyes of everyone who had watched my story unfold. I looked at the world that had underestimated an old man in a hospital bed. A small, dry smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator who has secured his territory. It was the smile of a king who has beheaded the usurpers. My eyes, once clouded with grief and confusion, were now clear and sharp. They held the glint of steel, the cold, hard hard light of a winter sun. I was old, I was scarred, I walked with a cane, but I was the last one standing. I am Reggie King, I thought, and I still have my claws. Moral lesson: many believe that family is blood, a bond that cannot be broken. But blood does not guarantee loyalty, and shared DNA does not grant permission to destroy. I learned the hardest way that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones sitting at your dinner table smiling while they pour your poison. True family isn't about who you raise, it's about who stands by you when you have nothing left to give. Protect your legacy, but protect your dignity first. Never let love blind you to the sharp knife hidden in a familiar hand. Did you enjoy the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more life stories like this one.